Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Robert Caldwell. I never thought I'd find myself afraid of the dark again, not since I was a child. But that was before Copper Mountain, before I learned that some places in this world aren't meant to be disturbed. It was 1951 when I took the job reopening the old mine. The war was over, and America needed copper for the new buildings and power lines stretching across the country. The company offered good money, too good to pass up. And I had experience from working in mines out west during the war effort. It's a simple job, my new boss had said. The mine was closed in '32 during the Depression. Just needs a modern engineer to get things running again. I remember the drive into Milldale, the small town nestled at the base of Copper Mountain. Most of the buildings stood empty, their windows like hollow eyes watching us pass. My younger brother William sat beside me in the truck, staring up at the mountain looming over everything. "You sure this was a good idea, bringing me along?" William asked. "You're the best geologist I know," I told him, trying to sound confident. "Besides, it'll be good experience for you, and the fresh mountain air will do you good after all that time cooped up in university labs." The company had arranged for us to stay in the old foreman's house. It was dusty but solid, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been used in years. We spent that first afternoon unpacking while locals watched from across the street, whispering among themselves. That evening we walked to the only open business in town, a small general store run by a woman named Martha Wilson. She was tall and thin, with grey streaks in her dark hair and eyes that looked too old for her face. "You must be the new mining men," she said as we entered, not looking up from where she was stacking cans. "That's right. I'm Robert Caldwell, and this is my brother William. We're reopening the Copper Mountain operation." Martha stopped what she was doing and looked at us properly for the first time. "You shouldn't, excuse me?" I asked, caught off guard by her bluntness. "That mountain keeps what it wants," she said quietly. "Always has. You'd be wise to leave it be." William laughed nervously. "Ma'am, it's just a mountain, with copper in it that the country needs." Martha just shook her head and went back to her stocking. "You'll learn. They all do." The next morning we made our first trip up to the mine entrance. The old timber supports were still mostly solid, though they'd need reinforcing before we could bring in a full crew. William and I spent hours going through the main tunnel with our flashlights, taking samples and making notes. "Robert, come look at this," William called from a side passage. "These rock formations, they don't match up with the geological surveys at all." He was right. According to the old maps, we should have hit a fault line, but instead, the rock face curved in an almost perfect arc with strange ripple patterns I'd never seen before in all my years of mining. "Maybe the surveys were wrong," I suggested, though something about those patterns made my skin crawl. Deeper in, we found something even stranger. In a chamber that must have been one of the last worked before the mine closed, mining equipment had been arranged in what looked like deliberate patterns. Pickaxes formed a perfect circle, with hammers and chisels laid out in straight lines pointing to the center. "Some kind of joke the miners played before leaving?" William suggested, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Maybe," I said, though I couldn't imagine men about to lose their jobs taking time for such elaborate pranks. "Let's head back. It'll be dark soon." As we turned to leave, I swear I felt something like a faint vibration through my boots. Not the normal settling of a mountain, but something rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. "Did you feel that?" I asked William. "Feel what?" he replied, already heading toward the entrance. I stood there for a moment longer, listening to the silence of the mountain. Except it wasn't really silent. There was something else, something just at the edge of hearing. "Come on, Robert," William called back to me. "I don't want to be in here when night falls." I hurried after him, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. But as we walked back to town in the fading light, I couldn't shake the feeling that something up in that mountain had noticed us, and whatever it wasn't happy about our presence. Retry. The next few days passed in a blur of work. We hired some local men who needed the money bad enough to ignore Martha's warnings, plus a few experienced miners from neighboring towns. The company sent equipment, and soon the rhythmic sounds of picks and machinery echoed through the valley. Was checking support beams in the main tunnel when William found me, his face pale in the light of his helmet lamp. "Robert," he whispered, even though the nearest workers were a good distance away, "I keep hearing something in the sealed tunnels." "Probably just settling rocks," I said. "These old mines make all kinds of noises." William shook his head. "Not like this. It's tapping, rhythmic, like someone's trying to communicate." I frowned. "Show me." He led me deeper into the mine, past where our crew was working, to a tunnel that had been sealed off with wooden planks. A faded sign read, "Danger. Do not enter." "Listen," William said. I pressed my ear against the wood. At first there was nothing. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. Tap, 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 a pattern that repeated over and over. "Could be water dripping," I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. "For 20 minutes without changing?" William asked. "And listen to the pattern. It's too regular." He was right. Whatever was making that sound, it wasn't natural. "I'm going into town to check the company records," I said. "There must be some explanation for why this tunnel was sealed. At the company office in Milldale, I found old papers stuffed in filing cabinets. Most were payroll records and production reports, but then I found something interesting. A telegram dated November 1932. Operations suspended following incident. 12 men lost. Seal lower levels immediately." There was no explanation of what the incident was, no accident report, nothing in the local newspaper except a small mention of the mine closing due to economic conditions. When I asked our oldest worker, a man named Peterson, who'd been a teenager in Milldale when the mine closed, he just shook his head. "My pa worked that mine," he said quietly. He wouldn't talk about what happened. None of them would. All I know is they sealed those lower tunnels in a hurry, and the priest came up from the county seat to say prayers at the entrance. That night, I found a small journal wedged behind a drawer in the foreman's desk. The handwriting was shaky, and many pages were torn out. One entry caught my eye. "Found another hollow space today that shouldn't exist. The survey maps show solid rock, but there's a chamber big enough for 20 men to stand in. The walls feel wrong, too smooth, like they've been polished." Jenkins says he heard whispering coming from deeper in when he was alone. "The men are scared, so am I." The final entry was just one line. "They're in the walls. God help us." I didn't show the journal to William. He was already jumpy enough and we had a job to do. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house made me sit up straight, listening for patterns in the sounds. The next day, I tried asking around town about the mine's history. The few remaining residents either claimed not to know anything or quickly changed the subject. An old man spat on the ground when I mentioned the sealed tunnels. "You leave those be," he growled. "Nothing down there but trouble." I noticed something else strange. None of the locals would go near the mountain after sunset. Even miners who lived in town would finish their shifts and hurry home before the light faded, refusing overtime pay. One evening, I asked Martha about it as I bought supplies at her store. What really happened in that mine in 32? She stared at me for a long moment. "Some things are better left buried, Mr. Caldwell. If you're smart, you'll finish your job and leave, without digging where you shouldn't. 12 men died in there. I need to know if there's a safety risk to my crew." Martha's eyes flicked to the mountain visible through the store window. They didn't all die, she said so quietly I barely heard her. What do you mean? The mountain took them. There's a difference. She turned away, clearly done talking. I walked back to the house. The sun setting behind Copper Mountain cast a shadow that seemed to reach for the town like a dark hand. For the first time, I wondered if taking this job had been a terrible mistake. That night, William woke me up shaking. "The tapping," he whispered. "I can hear it in the walls of our house." I listened but heard nothing. Still, I didn't sleep. Again until morning. The work continued despite the strange feelings that hung over the mine. Tools started going missing, only to show up days later in deep parts of the mine, arranged in neat rows or perfect circles that no one would admit to. Making. One morning, Williams rushed into the mess hall where I was having coffee with the crew foreman. "Robert, you need to see this," he said, his eyes wide with excitement and fear. He led me down a passage we'd been clearing the day before. But now, where there had been a solid rock wall, there was an opening. "This wasn't here yesterday," I said, running my hand along the smooth edges of the tunnel. "We would have seen it." "That's not the strangest part," William replied. "Feel the walls." I placed my palm against the dark rock and pulled it back quickly. "It's warm. Like body temperature," William nodded, "and it doesn't show up on any of the old maps." I shined my light down the new tunnel. It curved gently downward, disappearing into darkness. "We're not exploring this without proper safety checks," I said. Firmly. "Get some air quality meters down here and extra supports." William looked disappointed but agreed. We marked the tunnel as off-limits until we could properly assess it. That afternoon, disaster struck elsewhere in the mine. A section of ceiling collapsed, trapping 3 workers in a small pocket of space. The rescue took hours, with everyone digging frantically to reach them before their air ran out. When we finally broke through, all 3 men were huddled together, shaking. They weren't hurt, just scared. But something else was wrong. They kept looking around wildly, jumping at every sound. "You okay, Davis?" I asked the oldest of them, a steady man who'd worked mines for 20 years. "We heard them," he whispered, "talking through the rocks." "Heard who?" "The rescue team." He shook his head. "Voices we didn't recognize, having a conversation about us, about our taste." The other men nodded in agreement, but wouldn't say more. Davis quit the next day. The other 2 stayed only because they needed the money. A week later, I was examining rock samples from a new section when I found something I'd never seen before. A thin vein of metal that wasn't copper, gold, or any ore I recognized. It had a bluish-silver sheen and felt unusually heavy. I put a small piece in my pocket to send for testing, but when I reached for it later, it was gone. I emptied my pockets twice before finding it in a corner I was sure I'd checked. It happened again the next day, as if the metal itself was moving when I wasn't looking. William wanted to explore the warm tunnel, but I kept making excuses to delay. Something about that perfect curve, the unnatural smoothness of the walls, made my skin crawl, but I couldn't keep everyone away forever. That evening, I finally worked up the courage to ask Martha Wilson about the strange metal. To my surprise, she invited me into her small apartment above the store. The walls were covered with old photographs and what looked like tribal masks. "My grandmother was half Ute," she explained, seeing me look at the masks. "She told stories, passed down about this mountain." Martha poured tea from a chipped pot. "The tribes never mined here. They took only what the mountain offered freely on the surface." "Why?" I asked. "They believed something lived deep inside, something old." She looked at me over her cup. "They called it the earth that hungers. They said it could make the rocks move, that it took people who dug too deep and made them part of the mountain." I laughed nervously. "Sounds like a story to scare children away from dangerous mines." Martha didn't smile. 2 summers ago, a boy from a hiking group wandered off near the old mine entrance. They found his shoes and backpack, but never found him. Last fall, a geologist came to study the mountain. He went up alone one morning and never came back. I swallowed hard. And the incident in 1932? 12 men went down to the bottom level. Only 3 came back up, and they were, she hesitated, changed. Changed how? They had metal growing under their skin. Little bumps at first, then plates like armor. They were sick with fever, talking about voices in their heads. They died within weeks. The priest said it was some kind of poisoning, but my grandmother knew better. I thought about the strange metal I'd found, the moving tools, the too warm tunnel. What would you do? I asked quietly. Leave, she said without hesitation. But you won't. None of them ever do, once the mountain knows them. The next day, one of the younger workers came to me complaining of pain in his arm. When he rolled up his sleeve, I saw it, small, hard bumps under his skin that gleamed faintly in the light. 3 more men reported the same symptoms by evening. Whatever was happening in Copper Mountain, it was getting worse. And it was spreading. William spent more and more time alone in the mine. I worried about him, but we had our hands full with sick workers and production deadlines. The company was getting impatient with our slow progress. One afternoon, William burst into my office, his face streaked with dirt and his eyes wild with excitement. I found something, Robert. Something incredible. His voice shook. You have to see it. Another tunnel, I asked, already reaching for my helmet. No, something much bigger. He led me deep into the mine, past our active work areas, past even the warm tunnel we'd been avoiding. We crawled through a narrow passage that I was certain hadn't been there the week before. Watch your step, William warned as the passage opened up. I stopped, my mouth falling open. We stood at the edge of an enormous cavern, so large our lights couldn't reach the far side. The ceiling rose at least 50 feet above us. But it wasn't the size that made my heart race. It was what filled the space. Stone columns rose from floor to ceiling, not rough and natural, but perfectly smooth, with strange symbols etched into their surfaces. Between them stood structures that looked like altars or machines, made from the same bluish metal I'd found in the rock samples. This isn't natural, I whispered. No, William agreed. Someone or something built this. And Robert, look at the floor. The ground beneath our feet wasn't dirt or stone, but a vast mosaic of metal pieces fitted together like a puzzle. They formed a massive spiral pattern that seemed to pull the eye toward its center. How did you find this place? I asked. I followed. The sounds. William's voice had a dreamlike quality. They've been getting clearer, like they want me to hear them. A chill ran down my spine. We should go. Report this to the company. William shook his head. Not yet. There's more to discover first. I practically had to drag him away. That night, he barely spoke, just stared at his notebook, making drawings of the symbols we'd seen. The next day, one of our most experienced miners, Jenkins, disappeared during his shift. His work partner said they'd split up to check different passages, and Jenkins never returned. We searched for hours, but found only his helmet, sitting in the middle of a tunnel, as if carefully placed there. That was when my instrument started, going crazy. Compasses spinning wildly, metal detectors screaming at empty air. I brought in more sensitive equipment, and the readings made no sense. They suggested the mountain's interior was shifting, like something inside was moving around. The company sent a mining executive named George Harmon to investigate our delays. He was a hard man, in an expensive suit, with no patience for what he called ghost stories and jittery nerves. Miners are a superstitious lot, he told me after interviewing the crew. Always have been. You've got copper to extract, Caldwell. That's what matters. We've lost a man, I said. Workers are getting sick. Something's not right in this mountain. What's not right is your management style, Harmon snapped. These men need discipline, not someone who listens to their campfire tales. He announced we would be expanding operations, pushing deeper into the mountain. When I showed him the strange readings from my instruments, he dismissed them as equipment failure. "I want dynamite crews in the lower levels tomorrow," he ordered. "We're behind schedule, and I intend to fix that." That night, as the sun set behind Copper Mountain, I could have sworn I saw the rock face ripple just slightly, like something huge taking a breath. William wasn't at dinner. I found him in his room staring at the wall, his fingers tracing patterns. "In the air. They're waking up," he whispered when I entered. "They've been asleep so long, but now they're waking up." "Who's waking up, William?" I asked, my mouth dry with fear. He turned to me, and for a moment his eyes seemed to reflect light like a cat's. "The ones who've always been here," he said. "The ones who belong to the mountain, and the mountain belongs to them." I helped him to bed, telling myself he was just overtired. But as I closed his door, I heard a sound from outside, a soft tapping against the window glass. Tap, 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 tap. The same pattern we'd heard in the sealed tunnel. When I looked out, there was nothing there. But in the moonlight, I could see tiny footprints in the dirt beneath the window. Too small for a man, with too many toes. They led from the house directly toward the looming shadow of Copper Mountain. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in a chair by the window, my father's old, shotgun across my lap, watching the darkness. Nothing came, but I could feel the mountain watching me back. In the morning, Harmon gathered the crew at the mine entrance. Despite my protests, he was determined to blast deeper into the lower levels. "This operation is already weeks behind," he told the men. "Today we start making real progress." The workers looked nervous, especially those with the strange bumps spreading under their skin, but no one spoke up. Jobs were scarce, and Harmon made it clear that complainers would be replaced. I pulled him aside one last time. "At least let me inspect the blast area first. Make sure it's stable." "You've had weeks to inspect," Harmon said coldly. "The dynamite team goes in at noon." I couldn't stop him, so I joined the team, determined to at least make sure the blast was as safe as possible. We went deep into the mine, past the warm tunnel, setting charges along a rock face where our instruments had detected a potentially rich copper vein. That was when we saw it, or them, for the first time. It started with a ripple in the rock wall, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then a shape emerged, pushing through the solid stone like it was walking through water. The creature stood about 4 feet tall, with a body that shimmered with metallic hues of copper and silver. It had no real face, just a smooth area where a face should be, with indentations that might have been eyes. Its hands had too many fingers, each ending in a point like a chisel. One of the dynamite men screamed. Another turned to run. The creature raised a hand, and every metal object in the tunnel, tools, belt buckles, the nails in our boots, vibrated violently. The running man's helmet flew off his head, then his belt buckle tore through his clothes. Then the fillings in his teeth pulled free in a spray of blood. "Go!" I shouted, grabbing the nearest worker and shoving him toward the exit. "Everyone, out!" More shapes were emerging from the walls now. 3, then 5, then dozens. They didn't run or attack. They just reached out, and metal responded to them like it was alive. A pickaxe lifted from the ground and reshaped itself in mid-air, its handle twisting like a snake, its head flattening and sprouting new points. A lantern exploded, its metal parts forming a sphere that spun faster and faster. Somehow, we made it back to the main tunnel. I did a quick count, 3 men missing, and no sign of Harmon. Back on the surface, I organized search parties, but no one would go deeper than the first level. By nightfall, I had to accept that the missing men weren't coming back. I found William sitting on a rock outside the mine entrance, staring at the mountain with a strange smile. "You saw them," he said. It wasn't a question. "What are they, William?" "Guardians. They protect what's in the mountain." I grabbed his shoulders. "How do you know that? William, what's happening to you?" That's when I noticed the pattern on his neck. thin lines of metal just under his skin, spreading up from his collar in intricate branching patterns. When I touched them, they felt warm, and William shuddered. "They talk through the rock," he whispered. "Vibrations. It hurts at first, but then you understand." I took William back to our house and called for the town doctor. Dr. Miller arrived looking tired and grim. "I've got 6 other patients with the same symptoms," he said after examining William. "Whatever this is, it's spreading. Can you treat it?" The doctor shook his head. "I've tried everything. It's not like any disease I've ever seen. The metal just keeps growing." I showed him my brother's neck, where the pattern had spread further in just the few hours since we'd returned from the mine. "Look familiar?" I asked. Dr. Miller's face went pale. "It's just like the men from 32, he whispered. "I was still in medical school, but I remember the pictures. They all died within weeks." "There has to be something we can do," I insisted. "Get him away from here," the doctor said firmly. "Get everyone away from the mountain. That's my medical advice." But it was too late for that. The next morning, I found William gone from his bed. A trail of metallic dust led from his room, out the door, and toward the mine. I ran all the way there, finding chaos at the entrance. During the night, all the equipment had been changed. Shovels had melted and reformed into strange shapes. Carts had broken apart and reassembled into things that looked almost like insects, with too many wheels and handles that bent in impossible ways. And there were vibrations coming from deep inside the mountain, not the rumble of a collapse, but something rhythmic, like massive machinery starting up, or like a giant heart beginning to beat faster. I found Harmon near one of the equipment sheds. He was alive, but his eyes were vacant, staring at nothing. Small bumps of metal protruded from his forehead in a perfect circle. "The special metal," he kept mumbling. "It changes reality, changes physics. Too valuable to leave, too valuable." I'd seen enough. I ordered everyone out of the mine and back to town. Half the crew didn't wait for their pay. They just grabbed their belongings and left on the first trucks heading out. As for me, I had to find my brother. I gathered the few workers who stayed, mostly those already showing signs of the metal growth, and we formed a search party for William. No one wanted to go back into the mine, but they understood the need to find my brother. The mine had changed overnight. Tunnels that had been straight now curved and twisted. Passages that had led to dead ends now opened into new chambers. It was as if the mountain itself was rearranging its insides. "Stay together," I warned the men. "No one goes off alone." We followed the main shaft down to the second level, our headlamps creating small islands of light in the darkness. The air felt thick and strangely metallic, like breathing in tiny particles of copper. "Mr. Caldwell!" one of the men, Parker, called out. "Listen!" We all stopped. From somewhere ahead came the sound of metal striking metal, a rhythmic, deliberate pattern. "Could be your brother," suggested Peterson, the oldest miner in our group. "Or it could be them," whispered another. We moved forward cautiously. The tunnel opened into a large chamber that hadn't been there the day before. In the center stood William, his back to us, hammering at the rock wall with a pickaxe. "William," I called out, relief washing over me. "Thank God." He turned slowly. The metallic pattern had spread across his face now, thin lines of silver and copper tracing his cheeks and forehead like circuitry. His eyes had a strange, reflective quality. "You shouldn't have come, Robert," he said, his voice oddly flat. "It's not safe for you." "We're leaving," I told him firmly. "All of us, right now." William shook his head. "I can't leave. They need me to help them understand, and I need to understand them." "Who needs you? Those things?" "They're not things," William said. "They're the mountain's children. They've been here longer than humans have walked the earth." I took a step toward him. "You're sick, William. Whatever those creatures did to you..." "They showed me the truth," he interrupted, "about the mountain, about what's really inside it. Low rumble shook the chamber, dust falling from the ceiling. One of the men behind me made a sound like a whimper. "That's Harmon," William said calmly. "He brought more dynamite. He thinks he can blast his way to the center, take what's there." Another rumble, stronger this time. "We need to get out," I said, reaching for William's arm. "Now!" The wall behind William rippled, and one of the metallic creatures stepped through. Then another, and another. The miners began backing toward the exit. "They won't hurt you, William," he said. "Not if you respect the mountain." But at that moment, a massive explosion shook the entire mine. Chunks of rock fell from the ceiling. The creatures' smooth faces turned upward, and though they had no mouths, I could have sworn I heard them scream. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing William and pulling him toward the exit. The creatures weren't attacking us. They seemed focused on something else, moving through the walls in the direction of the explosion. But the tunnel behind us was collapsing. Peterson fell as the floor buckled beneath him. Another man, Davis, reached to help him, but the ground between them split open. I watched in horror as Peterson slid into the crack, his scream cut short as the earth closed over him like a mouth. Somehow, we made it to the main shaft, climbing toward daylight as the world fell apart around us. I kept a tight grip on William's arm, dragging him when he tried to turn back. We burst into sunlight to find chaos. Harmon had ignored my orders and brought in a new dynamite crew, setting off a massive blast in an attempt to open a faster route to the lower levels. Now the ground around the mine entrance was cracking, equipment sinking into suddenly soft earth. "Get away from the mountain," I shouted to everyone. "Fall back to town." We watched from a distance as Harmon's new crew fled from the mine entrance. Only 3 men emerged. They'd gone in with 7. That night, I tried to make William see reason. The metal pattern had spread further, covering most of his chest, and back now, his skin felt hot to the touch, almost feverish. "The mountain is waking up," he told me, staring out the window at the looming peak. "After what Harmon did today, they're all waking up, the ones that have been sleeping for centuries." "Who, William? What are they?" "They're the children of the special metal, the one that can change reality. They protect it." He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the lamplight strangely. "The 1932 miners found a large deposit and tried to take it. That's when the Guardians first revealed themselves." I remembered the journal I'd found, the final desperate entry. "They're in the walls. God help us." "What happens now?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Now they hunt," William said simply. "Anyone who's tried to steal from the mountain. And they won't stop until they've taken back every piece of the special metal." "Taken back," William nodded. "From the miners who have it in their blood now, from the equipment made with it, from everywhere it's been scattered." A scream echoed. From somewhere in town, then another. I ran to the window. In the moonlight I could see shapes moving between the houses, small, glittering figures that seemed to flow rather than walk. The mountain had come to Milldale. I grabbed my shotgun and ran outside. People were fleeing their homes as the metallic creatures moved through town. They weren't attacking randomly. They were hunting specific people, those who had worked in the mine. "Martha!" I shouted, running toward the general store. If anyone knew what to do, it would be her. I found her calmly packing supplies into a bag, as if she'd been expecting this night for years. "They've come into town," I said breathlessly. She nodded. "I told you the mountain keeps what it wants." She handed me a small leather pouch. "Iron filings mixed with salt. It won't stop them, but it might slow them down." "How do you know these things?" I demanded. Martha sighed and rolled up her sleeve. There on her arm was a faded pattern of metallic lines, just like the ones growing on William and the sick miners. "My grandmother survived the last time they came in 1932, she said quietly. "She passed what she learned to me. My family has been the mountain's liaison for generations." Liaison. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "We make sure no One digs too deep. We warn people away. In return, the mountain leaves us alone." She looked at me sadly. "I tried to warn you, but you wouldn't listen. No one ever does." Outside, more screams echoed through the town. We peered through the window and saw one of the mine workers, Reynolds, surrounded by 3 of the creatures. They weren't touching him, but all the metal objects on his body, his belt buckle, his watch, the coins in his pocket, were pulling away from him, tearing through clothing and skin. And something else was being pulled out too, tiny particles that glittered as they flowed from his pores. "The metal in his blood," Martha whispered. "They're taking it back." Reynolds collapsed to the ground. The creatures moved on. "Why are they doing this?" I asked. "Your brother was right. The mountain is waking up. It's alive in a way we can't really understand. These creatures, they're not separate beings. They're parts of it, like hands or eyes. The mountain is one massive organism. I thought of the warm tunnel walls, the shifting passages, the vibrations that felt like a heartbeat. And the special metal? It's like the mountain's blood," Martha explained. "When humans mine it and take it away, the mountain wants it back, needs it back." A crashing sound came from the back of the store. We turned to see one of the creatures emerging from the wall. It stood there, not approaching, its featureless face turned toward Martha. She nodded, as if receiving a message. "It's getting worse," she said to me. "The drilling and blasting has disturbed something deep inside, the mountain's heart. If it fully awakens, what happens then?" "Everything for 50 miles dies," she said simply. "It happened before. Thousands of years ago. That's what the Ute legends say. The mountain breathed out and everything that breathed in changed. The creature sank back into the wall, disappearing. I had to get back to William. As I ran through the streets, I saw more of the creatures moving through town, and I noticed something strange. The long-time residents of Milldale weren't running. They stood in their doorways, watching calmly, all of them bearing faded metallic patterns on their skin. Generations of people who had lived in the mountain's shadow, changed by its influence. When I reached our house, I found William sitting on the porch, staring at the mountain. The metallic pattern now covered almost his entire body, gleaming in the moonlight. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said, not looking at me. "The way everything connects." "William, we have to leave. Now." He shook his head. "I can hear them all now. The voices, thousands of them, all part of one bigger mind. The mountain's mind." He finally turned to me. "They want me to join them, Robert." "No," I said firmly. "You're my brother. You're human." "Am I?" He held up his hand. The fingers had elongated, the tips turning metallic and sharp. "I'm changing, becoming something else, something more." Before I could respond, a new sound cut through the night. Engines. Heavy military trucks were rolling into town, their headlights sweeping across the panicked streets. "Someone called the government," William said. "They're coming for the special metal. They think it can be a weapon." "How do you know that?" "The mountain knows," he replied, his voice distant. "It can feel their thoughts, their intentions." The lead truck stopped in the town square, and men in military uniforms poured out. A tall man in a colonel's uniform surveyed the chaos, barking orders. Soldiers began setting up equipment, strange devices with dials and antennas. "They don't understand what they're dealing with," William whispered. "The mountain won't let them take it. Not again." As if in response to his words, the ground began to shake, not the rumble of a natural earthquake, but an organized rhythmic tremor, like massive machinery starting up deep below, or like a giant heart beginning to beat. Faster and faster. The military moved fast, setting up a perimeter around the mine entrance. Soldiers with heavy weapons escorted scientists carrying strange equipment toward the mountain. They seemed prepared, like they knew exactly what they were looking for. "How did they know about the special metal?" I asked William. "They've been watching," he replied, his voice now having a slight metallic echo. "The company reports the unusual readings. They've suspected something was here for years. The colonel spotted us and marched over, flanked by 2 armed soldiers. You Caldwell?" he demanded, looking at me. I nodded. "Colonel James Mercer, U.S. Army Special Resources Division. This area is now under military control. I need everything you know about the anomalous material you've discovered." "You need to get your men out of here," I said urgently. "It's not safe. The mountain is a mountain," he cut me off, "and it contains something the government needs. Your cooperation would be appreciated but is not required." His eyes flicked. To William, noting the metallic patterns covering his skin. "Interesting," he murmured. "Bring him," he ordered his men. "The scientists will want to examine him." "He's my brother," I protested. "He needs medical help." "He'll get the best care the government can provide," Mercer said. But there was something cold in his eyes that told me William would become just another specimen to study. The soldiers reached for William, but he moved with sudden, inhuman speed. In an instant, he was 10 feet away. "The mountain won't let you take it," William said, his voice eerily calm. "And neither will I." The ground beneath our feet shuddered. Not the rhythmic vibrations from before, but a violent shift that knocked several soldiers off their feet. From the direction of the mine came a deafening crack as the earth split open. Mercer shouted orders as his men scrambled for their vehicles. The scientists' equipment began to malfunction, dials spinning wildly and lights flashing. "Fall back. To position Alpha," Mercer commanded. "Prepare the containment protocol." I didn't know what containment protocol meant, but I knew we needed to get as many people away from the mountain as possible. "William, please," I begged. "Come with me. We need to evacuate the town." For a moment, something like recognition flickered in his increasingly alien eyes. "Yes, the people. Help them, Robert." I ran through town, warning everyone to leave. Most were already fleeing, throwing belongings into cars and trucks. Martha was helping elderly residents into a bus. "The military's here," I told her as I helped load suitcases. "I know," she replied grimly. "They make it worse. The mountain, it feels threatened, cornered." "What can I do?" She looked me directly in the eyes. "You have to go back in. To the heart chamber William found. The creatures are gathering there. It's where the mountain's consciousness lives." "And do what?" "Make peace," she said simply. "Or seal it away. Those are the only choices now." The ground shook again, harder this time. In the distance I could see the military setting up what looked like massive drills around the mine entrance. They were going in, no matter what. As people fled the town, I headed in the opposite direction toward the mountain. I found William standing halfway between the town and the mine, watching the military's preparations. "You're going back in," he said. It wasn't a question. "I have to try to stop this. More people will die if I don't." William nodded. "I'll show you the way to the heart. It's changing. The tunnels are all different now." Together, we approached the mine. The military was too busy with their equipment to notice us slipping past their perimeter. Inside, the main shaft had completely transformed. The straight tunnel had become spiral, curving downward like a massive corkscrew. "The mountain is pulling everything inward," William explained as we descended, "protecting its core." We passed side tunnels where I glimpsed terrible things. The missing miners from 1932, embedded in the walls, their bodies partly transformed into the same metallic material as the creatures. They were still alive somehow, their eyes following us as we passed. "The mountain keeps what it claims," William whispered. The tunnel finally opened into the massive chamber I'd seen before, but now it was filled with dozens of the metallic creatures, all standing perfectly still. Facing the center where a massive crystal structure pulsed with blue-white light. "The heart," William said with reverence. "The source of the special metal, the mind of the mountain." As we stepped into the chamber, all the creatures turned toward us. I felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure. "They're angry," William said. The humans have gone too far this time. They're going to... A massive explosion shook the chamber. The military had started blasting their way in. The crystalline structure pulsed faster, its light becoming painfully bright. The creatures began to move, flowing into the walls, disappearing. They're going to kill everyone, William said, his voice tight with fear. The soldiers, the town, everything within miles. The mountain is going to breathe out. How do I stop it? I demanded. You can't, unless... William looked at the crystal, then back at me. The heart needs to be sealed, cut off from the surface. But the only way... Another explosion, closer this time. Part of the chamber ceiling collapsed. William's face hardened with resolve. There's one way. If someone who understands the mountain directs its energy inward instead of outward, creates a collapse that seals the heart chamber. I understood. Then, no, William. There has to be another way. There isn't. His metallic patterned hand touched my face. I'm already part of it, Robert. I can feel everything it feels, its fear, its rage, but I'm still human enough to make a choice. Tears filled my eyes. You'll die. I'll change, he corrected gently. Become something else, part of something ancient and vast. He smiled. It's too late for me anyway. The transformation is too far along. The ground shook again. We could hear the military's drills getting closer. Go, William said, pushing me toward the exit tunnel. Get as far away as you can. Tell them to stop drilling. Tell them the mountain took what it wanted and there's nothing left. I wanted to argue to find another solution, but there was no time. I hugged my brother one last time, feeling the hard ridges of metal beneath his skin. I love you, William, I whispered. I know, he replied. Now run. I ran back up the spiral tunnel as the world shook around me. Behind me, I heard a new sound. Not the rumble of explosions or the rhythm of the mountain's heartbeat, but a pure, crystal tone that seemed to vibrate through every atom of rock. William, communicating with the heart. I barely made it to the surface when the final collapse began. Not violent and chaotic, but controlled, precise, tunnels sealing themselves in perfect sequence. The military personnel scrambled back as their equipment was pulled into the earth. Colonel Mercer grabbed me as I emerged. What's happening? Where's the other one? It's over, I told him. The special metal, the creatures, everything you came for, it's sealed away where no one can reach it. My brother made sure of that. The mountain gave one final shudder, then went still, completely, utterly still, in a way that mountains rarely are, like something alive that had decided to hold its breath. 5 years later, I returned to Milldale. The town was mostly abandoned, though a few stubborn souls remained. Martha Wilson was one of them, still running her store for the handful of customers who passed through. They're starting a new mining operation, she told me over coffee. Different company, different part of the mountain. Is that safe? I asked. She showed me her arm, where the metallic pattern had faded to near invisibility. The mountain sleeps. Deeply now, your brother did that. Sealed the heart chamber so completely that the creatures can't get out. She paused. Most of them, anyway. I looked up sharply. Most? Martha nodded toward the window where we could see the mountain in the distance. The new miners have been finding strange growths in the rocks. And at night, some say they hear whispered conversations when they're alone in the tunnels. I felt a chill run down my spine, but also a strange hope. William? Maybe, Martha said softly. The mountain keeps what it claims, Robert. Always has. As I drove away from Milldale for the last time, I glanced in my rearview mirror at Copper Mountain, growing smaller in the distance. For just a moment I could have sworn I saw the rocky face shift, like something taking a breath after holding it for a very long time. And from the radio, through the static, I heard a familiar pattern of taps. Tap, 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 tap. A message from deep within the earth. A reminder that some things are better left buried and that the mountain always keeps what it claims. Always. My name is Daniel Mercer. I take pictures of nature for a living, mostly focusing on how humans are changing the environment. Last week I rented a small wooden cabin built on tall stilts in the Louisiana bayou. I came here to take pictures of how the wetlands are washing away into the sea. The cabin sits alone, surrounded by murky water and twisted cypress trees draped with Spanish moss that sways in the hot, humid breeze. The nearest town is called Mercier Landing, a collection of weathered buildings that you can only reach by a boat. The people there don't seem to like outsiders much. When I stop by for supplies, conversations stop and eyes follow me until I leave. I try to be friendly, but their stares make my skin crawl. My guide's name is Cecile Thibodeau, a local woman with deep knowledge of the bayou. Yesterday, as we glided through the narrow waterways in her flat-bottomed boat, she pointed to places where trees stood dead in the water. "You see there, Mr. Mercer? That used to be solid ground where people built homes," she said, her accent thick like the air around us. "We call them the drowning lands. The water takes everything eventually." Her words sent a chill through me despite the heat. Then she told me something that made me uneasy about my new home. "The man who lived in your cabin before, he was studying the water levels too. Strange man, always taking measurements, collecting samples. One morning his boat was found empty, drifting near the South Channel. Nobody ever saw him again." Back at the cabin, I sorted through my equipment and set up my dark room in the bathroom. Looking through my camera lens at the patterns in the mud around my cabin, I noticed something odd. From above, the silt forms shapes that almost look like writing, curves and lines too regular to be natural. This morning, I met a fisherman named Raymond Prejean. He was checking his crab traps near my cabin and offered to share some coffee from his thermos. "You staying out here alone?" he asked, looking at my cabin with worry in his eyes. "Just for a few weeks," I answered. He nodded slowly. "Watch yourself at twilight. That's when Les Hommes Creux come out." "The hollow men?" I translated, raising an eyebrow. "That's what my grandpapa called them. They walk only when the sun touches. The water not in day, not in night." He wouldn't say more, just tipped his hat and pushed his boat away. Later, I developed the photographs I'd taken yesterday. Something strange happened. Around the edges of the water in each picture, there's a blurring, like something moved just as I pressed the shutter. But I know nothing was there. While looking for extra bulbs for my lamp, I found a hatch in the floor that led to a small crawl space beneath the cabin. The space was damp and smelled of rot. My flashlight beam caught the gleam of glass. Dozens of jars lined up on a makeshift shelf. Each contained some kind of preserved animal, floating in yellowish liquid. They looked like fish, but some had fur or what appeared to be tiny limbs. I closed the hatch quickly, my hands shaking. That night, a storm hit unlike anything I'd ever seen. Rain pounded the roof so hard I thought it might collapse. Lightning struck so close that the air buzzed with electricity. The strangest part, when I looked out the window during a flash of lightning, I could see the storm clouds circling directly above my cabin, as if it were the center of their fury. Unable to sleep, I set up my recording equipment to capture the sounds of the storm. When I played it back this morning, beneath the rain and thunder, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Voices, faint but unmistakable, speaking words I couldn't understand, as if the recording was playing backwards. But the voices weren't coming from the air. They were coming from beneath the water. I've been here only 3 days, but already I feel like the bayou is watching me, waiting for something. And I'm starting to think the missing researcher didn't just drown by accident. I woke up this morning to find the water around my cabin had risen by at least 6 inches overnight. Strange thing is, we've had no rain since that big storm 3 days ago. When I called Cecile on the radio to ask about She just said, "The water does what it wants out here." Last night I noticed something else weird. The water around my cabin glowed with faint blue-green light, making patterns like someone was drawing with light under the surface. I took some photos, but I'm almost afraid to develop them. Yesterday, I took the boat into Mercier Landing for supplies. On the way back, the engine died right in the middle of the channel. No warning, just went silent. I checked the gas, the spark plug. Everything seemed fine, but it wouldn't start again. A thick fog rolled in while I was working on it, hiding the shoreline completely. I had to paddle back, which took hours. The whole time, I felt like something was swimming alongside my boat, just beneath the surface. This morning, I found something that made me sick to my stomach. The water level had dropped a bit, exposing the mud around the stilts of my cabin. There, half buried in the silt, was what looked like a human arm. I poked at it with a stick, and part of it crumbled away. It had been there a long time. I dug around more and found other body parts, all partially preserved in the mud. Like they'd been placed there on purpose. When Cecile came by with more fuel for my generator, I told her what I'd found. She didn't seem surprised. 7 people gone missing round here in 2 years, she said quietly. The bayou keeps what it takes. Shouldn't we call the police? I asked. She just laughed. Police don't come out here, Mr. Mercer. This is the drowning. Lands. I've noticed something happening to my skin. After wading in the water to check the boat, my ankles and hands developed a rash, scaly and dry like fish skin. It itches like crazy, and no amount of cream seems to help. Last night, I woke up to a dripping sound. At first I thought the roof was leaking, but when I turned on the light, I saw water seeping through the walls. The strangest part, it wasn't dripping down. The moisture was crawling up the walls against gravity. I touched it, and it felt warm, almost body temperature. This morning, a team of 3 researchers arrived in a big boat with Gulf Coast Environmental Survey painted on the side. They said they're here to study the unusual erosion patterns in this part of the bayou. Their leader, Dr. Monica Evans, set up monitoring equipment all around my cabin. Within hours, she was knocking on my door, looking confused. Our readings make no sense, she said, showing me a tablet with graphs and numbers. According to this, the land here is both sinking and rising at the same time. That's impossible. While the researchers worked, I took my camera and waded out to a small island about 50 yards from my cabin. The mud there felt strange under my feet, not like normal solid ground. In some places, it seemed to shift and move as I walked. Using a long stick, I poked at the ground and discovered tunnel-like spaces beneath the surface, wide enough for something big to move through. Tonight, Monica went out in a small boat to check on some equipment they'd placed in the deeper water. She didn't come back. We searched for hours, eventually finding her empty boat drifting near where I'd seen the tunnels. Her equipment was still in the boat, perfectly arranged, not like she'd fallen out. When we returned to my cabin, exhausted and worried, we saw lights from the direction of Mercier Landing. Through my camera zoom lens, I could see people gathering at the water's edge. It's a new moon tonight, completely dark, but I could make out the shapes of the townspeople placing things in the water. Small bundles that sank slowly beneath the surface. Some kind of offering ritual. When I mentioned it to the other researchers, they wanted to go investigate, but something told me we should stay put tonight. I don't think we're dealing with normal wetland erosion anymore. And I'm starting to wonder if Cecile and the townspeople know exactly what's happening out here. It's been 3 days since Monica disappeared. The other researchers, Marcus and Jen, wanted to call for help, but our radios stopped working yesterday. Even their satellite phone shows no signal. We're cut off. This morning, we saw them for the first time. The creatures, the ones Raymond must have meant when he talked about les hommes creux, the hollow men. It was just after sunrise. The fog was thick over the water as usual. Marcus was checking the equipment when he called out. When Jen and I ran outside, we saw him pointing at something moving in the shallow water near the shore. At first, I thought it was a person swimming. Then it stood up. It was shaped like a human, but not quite right. Its skin was a muddy grey-green, slick like a frog's. Where its face should have been, it had something like a dog's snout, but with gills fluttering on the sides of its neck. Its hands had long fingers with webs between them. More of them rose from the water, 5, then 10. They moved without making a splash, like they were part of the water itself. "What are they?" Jen whispered, her voice shaking. "Dogmen," I said, the name coming to my mind from nowhere. One of them reached down into the mud and moved its hand in. A circle. The ground where it touched turned to liquid, though it looked solid. It was making quicksand right before our eyes. Marcus took a step back and almost fell when his foot broke through what looked like solid ground. The mud had turned to water where he stepped, like the creatures had changed it somehow. They didn't speak, not with words. But we could feel the water pulsing, vibrating in a rhythm. They were talking to each other through the water itself. Then, from behind our cabin, another small boat approached. Inside was Monica. My heart jumped. She was alive. But as the boat got closer, my relief turned to horror. Monica's skin had a greenish tint. Her neck, there were slits forming on the sides like the beginning of gills. Her eyes were wide and glassy, and she moved like she was in a trance. "They're not killing us," she said when we helped her to the dock. Her voice sounded wet, like she was speaking through water. "They're changing us, making us like them." She told us the dogmen had kept her in an underwater cave. They'd given her something to drink that tasted like mud and blood mixed together. After that, she could breathe underwater for short periods as her body began to change. "They're not evil," she said, staring at the water. "They just need more of their kind." Marcus and Jen decided we needed to leave immediately. We packed essentials and took both boats, heading in different directions to improve our chances. Marcus and I went north while Jen and Monica went east. After an hour of following what I thought was the main channel back to civilization, Marcus noticed something strange. "We've seen that dead cypress tree 3 times now," he said, pointing to a distinctive, lightning-struck tree. "We're going in circles." He was right. Somehow, every waterway was leading us back to my cabin. It was impossible. I've mapped this area myself. The channels couldn't just change, but they had. When we finally gave up and returned to the cabin, Jen's boat was already there. Monica was missing again. "She jumped out," Jen said, her face pale with shock. "We were moving along fine when she just stood up, smiled at me, and stepped over the side. The water, it seemed to reach up and pull her in." That night, the 3 of us barricaded ourselves inside the cabin. I found some bottled water I'd brought from the city and passed it around. Jen refused. "I'm not thirsty," she said, but I saw her eyeing the water dripping down the walls with a strange hunger. "Have you been drinking the local water?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Just a little. It tasted good." Marcus grabbed her shoulders. "They control anyone who drinks their water," he said. "That's how they got to Monica so fast." Before Jen could respond, we heard a wet slapping sound beneath the floor. Then another from a different spot. The dogmen were under the cabin. The floor began to bulge upward in places, the wood groaning. Mud seeped through the cracks between the boards. It moved like it was alive, forming into ropes that reached for our ankles. Marcus jumped onto a chair, but Jen just stood there, watching the mud with fascination. A tendril of it wrapped around her leg. "Jen!" I shouted, grabbing her arm. She looked at me with eyes that were no longer entirely human. "The mud is calling me," she whispered. We tried to pull her free, but the living silt yanked her down through the floorboards. The wood splintered as she disappeared into the muck below. Her scream bubbled up through the mud, then went silent. That's when I realized the horrible truth. This whole area, everything I thought was just wetlands and bayou, it's all part of one massive living thing. The dogmen don't control the water and mud. They worship it. They serve it, and right now they're performing some kind of ritual to wake it up completely. Marcus and I stayed awake all night, listening to the creatures moving below us. By morning, we learned more about what we were facing, and it was worse than we could have imagined. At dawn, a boat approached the cabin. It was Cecile, but when she stepped onto the dock, she looked different. Her movements were too smooth, like she was gliding rather than walking. "You should come with me now, Mr. Mercer," she said. "The change isn't so bad once you accept it." "What are they?" I asked, keeping my distance. "The dogmen, what are they really?" She smiled, showing teeth that seemed sharper than before. "They were like you once, human. Generations ago, they learned to live with the water, not against it. The water changed them, made them better, made them part of something greater." "And the people in Mercier Landing?" Marcus asked. "We're in between," she said. "Part human, part something else. We watch for the entity, prepare for its awakening. That's why we brought you here, Daniel. Your pictures will document the transformation." I felt sick. "You've been part of this the whole time?" She nodded. "Everyone in town. We're all sentinels for what sleeps below." Suddenly, the water around the cabin began to move in impossible ways. It flowed uphill, formed walls, then collapsed back down. The land itself was changing. Channels that used to lead away from my cabin were closing up, while new ones formed elsewhere. "It's reshaping everything," Marcus whispered, "cutting us off." That's when I remembered something. The previous cabin owner's belongings were still in a trunk in the corner. I dug through it and found a weatherproof journal and a small digital voice recorder. The last entry was dated exactly 5 years before I arrived. "It awakens in cycles," the man had recorded. "Every 5 years, the pattern repeats. They need new blood, new bodies to continue their evolution. God help me, I can feel it changing me already." There was a splash outside. Monica had returned, but she was barely recognizable now. Her skin was fully scaled, her fingers webbed. Gills fluttered on her neck as she took shallow breaths of air. "The joining has begun," she said, her voice bubbling. "My mind, I can hear them all now. So many voices, all connected." Before we could respond, 3 dogmen emerged from the water around her. One reached toward a bucket of rainwater on the dock. The water rose out of the bucket on its own, forming a floating ball. The creature directed it toward a small bird that had landed nearby. The water enveloped the bird for just a moment. When it flowed away, the bird was nothing but a dried husk. They had pulled all moisture from its body in seconds. "They can do that to people too," Monica said, "but they won't if you join willingly." From her boat, Cecile pointed south. "Look." Miles away, we could see massive sinkholes forming, swallowing trees and land. The water seemed to boil as something enormous moved beneath the surface. "The entity is awake," she said. "It has shaped this coastline for centuries, preparing for this moment. The slow erosion, the vanishing wetlands, it was all part of the plan." I looked at Marcus, seeing the same realization in his eyes. The environmental disaster we came to document wasn't natural at all. It was guided. A Coast Guard helicopter appeared in the distance. Someone must have reported the sinkholes. As it flew closer, water suddenly formed inside the engine. We could hear the rotors stutter and fail as the helicopter spun and crashed into the bayou. I grabbed my camera and began taking pictures frantically. When I developed them an hour later, I saw what the naked eye couldn't, the dogmen's true form. They weren't solid at all, but made of living water, using physical bodies as vessels. They were like puppets, controlled by the water itself. While developing the photos, I noticed the chemical I was using made the water creatures recoil when it splashed onto the dock. It disrupted them somehow. I quickly mixed a larger batch, filling every container I could find. "I found something that hurts them," I told Marcus. "It won't last long, but it might give us a chance." He pointed to the floor. "The cabin. There's something underneath it. I can feel it vibrating." We broke through the floor and found what the previous owner had discovered. A stone structure hidden beneath the mud. Ancient symbols covered it, matching the patterns I'd seen in the silt from above. "It's a control system," Marcus said, "like a valve for whatever's down there." Cecile appeared in the doorway. Her human appearance was gone now, her skin translucent, her eyes huge and black. "The structure is sacred," she hissed. "It channels the entity's power." I realized then, destroy the stone structure, disrupt the entity. But the knowledge came with a terrible price. If we damaged it, the water control would fail completely. The entire region could flood catastrophically. "It's our only chance," I told Marcus. The rash on my ankles and hands had spread, the skin becoming rough and scaly. Whatever was happening to Monica was happening to me too, but slower. It gave me some resistance to their control. We armed ourselves with containers of the chemical and climbed down beneath the cabin. The stone structure was larger than it first appeared, a circular temple with a central pillar covered in carvings. The dogmen surrounded us, advancing through the shallow water. I threw the chemicals at them, watching their water forms ripple and break apart temporarily. Suddenly Monica appeared, fully transformed now. Her eyes were sad, but resolute. "I'll help. You reach the center," she said, "but I can't fight my new nature for long." She created a path through the dogmen, holding them back as Marcus and I reached the central pillar. "Set the chemicals here," I told him, pointing to cracks in the stone. "It'll seep down to the core." As we worked, the water rose rapidly. The dogmen had summoned a flood to stop us. Monica couldn't hold them back anymore. She turned to me with an inhuman smile. "Join us, Daniel," she pleaded. "It's beautiful beneath the surface." Marcus poured the last of the chemicals. The stone began to crack, black lines spreading across its surface. The dogman shrieked, a sound like water rushing through a narrow pipe. "Go!" I shouted to Marcus. "The boat! Get to higher ground!" "What about you?" he asked. The water was up to our chest now, and I could feel the current pulling at my legs. "The entity trying to drag me under. I'll be right behind you," I lied. As Marcus splashed toward the ladder, the temple began to collapse. I poured the remaining chemicals into the deepening cracks, watching as they glowed with an unnatural light. The last thing I saw was the water rushing in from all sides as the temple broke apart. Then darkness. I'm still here, beneath the surface. My body changed, but not my mind. Not yet. I can move through the mud tunnels the dogmen created. Sometimes I surface near my old cabin to leave a sign, a perfectly preserved photograph showing what's happening to the bayou. To me, I don't know. If Marcus escaped, I don't know if anyone will find my photos, but I know the entity is wounded, retreating deeper for now. The dogmen still hunt in the twilight, but their power is diminished. Sometimes I see new researchers arriving, studying the strange patterns left by the receding water. I watch them from beneath the surface, hoping they'll understand the warning in my pictures before it's too late, before the water rises again. 3 months have passed since the incident in the Louisiana Bayou. A new team of environmental researchers has arrived to study the strange drainage patterns that appeared overnight. In the abandoned cabin on stilts, they find a waterproof case containing dozens of perfectly preserved photographs. Each shows the bayou's transformation, the water reshaping the land in impossible ways. In the corner of each image, barely visible beneath the water's surface, is a human silhouette. With each progressive photo, the figure becomes less human and more a part of the water itself, watching, waiting for the next cycle to begin. My name is Julia Norris. I took a job as a forest ranger at Deadfall Fire Watchtower after my partner Charlie died. I needed to get away from everything that reminded me of him. Our apartment, our friends, the hiking trails we used to explore together. When the position opened up at this remote tower in the Pacific Northwest, I jumped at the chance. The tower sits on top of a hill, overlooking an ancient forest that stretches as far as the eye can see. It's beautiful, but there's something strange about it. The locals told me that logging companies have tried to cut down parts of this forest for decades, but they always fail. Equipment breaks down, workers quit, accidents happen. No one has ever successfully logged even a small section. My job is simple: watch for fires, report any problems, and maintain the tower. I'm all alone up here. My only regular contact with other people is once a month when a helicopter drops off supplies, and weekly radio check-ins with the ranger station 40 miles away. Sometimes I go days without speaking out loud. I've been here for 2 weeks now. Yesterday, I found something disturbing. While walking around the base of the tower, I noticed piles of animal bones arranged in perfect circles. Deer skulls, bird bones, and what looked like rabbit spines were placed in patterns that couldn't have happened naturally. Someone, or something, had put them there on purpose. I called the ranger station about it, and they said a local guide was coming by to check some trail markers anyway. They'd ask him to stop by my tower. The guide's name was Aidan Redfeather. He was tall and quiet, with deep lines around his eyes that made him look like he'd seen too much in his life. When I showed him the bone arrangements, his face went dark. "You need to be careful up here," he said, kneeling to look at the patterns. "My people have stories about this forest, about the ones who walk between the trees." "What does that mean?" I asked. He stood up and looked at the dense wall of pines surrounding us. "It means this forest is old, older than any of us, and it doesn't like visitors." I laughed nervously. "It's just a forest." Aidan didn't smile. "Is it? Then who arranged these bones?" After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. That night, I dreamed of movement outside my windows, something tall and fluid, moving in a way that didn't seem human. I woke up covered in sweat, convinced someone was watching me. The next morning, I found the logbooks from the previous rangers who'd worked at Deadfall Tower. The earliest ones were normal, daily reports about weather, wildlife sightings, the occasional lost hiker, but the more recent entries were different. The handwriting got messier, the reports more scattered. The last ranger wrote about hearing drums in the forest at night, about trees that moved when he wasn't looking, about feeling like the forest was watching him. His final entry just said, "They're coming through the trees." After that, nothing. According to the ranger station, he quit suddenly and moved away. No forwarding address. While hiking one of the trails near the tower, I noticed strange symbols carved into certain trees. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Not letters or pictures exactly, but something in between. When I tried to look directly at them, I got dizzy and disoriented. When I took photos and looked at them later on my computer, the symbols were blurry, as if they refused to be captured. I set up wildlife cameras around the tower, hoping to catch whoever was. Leaving the bone arrangements, when I checked the footage a few days later, I saw something that made my skin crawl. A herd of deer moved through the clearing at night, but they weren't moving like normal deer. They moved in perfect unison, like a school of fish, turning all at once, as if controlled by a single mind. This morning I woke up to find all my equipment rearranged. My binoculars were on the wrong shelf, my notebooks stacked in a different order, my food supplies organized by color instead of type. But the tower door was still locked from the inside. I checked the windows, all secure. I'm alone in this tower. I know I am. But something is happening here, something I don't understand, and I'm starting to think the forest is watching me. I woke up to the sound of wind howling around the tower. Not just a normal storm. This was different. The windows rattled like they might break any second. I wrapped myself in a blanket and looked outside. What I saw made my heart stop. The wind had knocked down trees all around the tower, but not in a random way. They had fallen in a perfect circle, like someone had drawn a line around my tower that nothing could cross. That's not possible, I whispered to myself, but there it was, right in front of me. That night, I heard it for the first time, a steady, drumming sound coming from deep in the forest. Thump, 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 like a heartbeat. But there shouldn't be anyone out there, especially not during a storm. I tried calling the ranger station on my radio, but all I got was static. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard my own voice. It was me, talking about the weather report. From yesterday, but I was alone. Nobody had recorded me. The radio was playing back my own words from the day before. I didn't sleep that night. 2 days later, I was checking the hiking trails when I found 2 people stumbling through the woods, a man and a woman, both looking tired and scared. Their clothes were dirty, and they had scratches all over their arms. "Thank God," the woman said when she saw me. "We've been lost for days." They told me their names were Brandon and Megan Davis. They were on a weekend hiking trip when they got turned around. "We kept trying to find our way back to the parking lot," Brandon explained as I made them hot coffee in the tower. "But we just went in circles. The trails, they don't make sense. We'd follow a path, and suddenly it would end at the same place. We started. I let them stay in the tower that night. Around 3 a.m., my perimeter alarms went off, simple bells I'd set up around the tower to warn me if animals came too close. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. Brandon was walking toward the forest, his eyes open but empty. He wasn't awake. I called his name, but he kept walking, right toward the tree line where the fallen trees made their perfect circle. I ran and grabbed his arm just before he crossed that line. He woke up with a jerk, looking confused. "I was dreaming about the trees," he said, shivering. "They were calling me." The next day, we went looking for a shortcut back to the main road. I found something I'd never seen before, a small opening in the rocks that led to a cave. Inside, the walls were covered with old paintings. They showed tall, skinny figures coming out of trees, their arms like branches, reaching for tiny human shapes. "What is this place?" Megan whispered, her voice shaking. That night, she told me something that made my skin crawl. "We've seen someone watching us in the forest," she said. "Someone tall, too tall to be a person. They stand between the trees and just watch." "It's probably just a bear standing on its hind legs," I said, trying to sound normal. She shook her head. "Bears don't have eyes that glow in the dark." That night, all 3 of us saw it. The trees outside the tower moved. Not from wind, there wasn't any. They just shifted, like they were changing places. In the morning, the path I'd used for weeks was gone, blocked by trees that hadn't been there before. Brandon wanted to try finding another way out. He said he'd just scout ahead a little bit, staying in sight of the tower. Megan and I watched him walk into the trees. 5 minutes later, we heard him scream. We ran to where he had disappeared. All we found was his boot, stuck in the trunk of a tree like the wood had grown around it. The boot was still tied, like he'd been yanked right out of it, but that's not possible. Trees don't grow that fast, and they don't eat people. As we searched for Brandon, I noticed something else. The forest was changing around us. Paths that were open would suddenly be blocked when we turned around. It was like the forest was moving, herding us, keeping us from finding our way. And then I understood why no one had ever logged this forest successfully. It wasn't just trees. It was something else entirely, and it didn't want us to leave. We searched for Brandon until the sun began to set. That's when we saw them for the first time. They came from between the trees, tall figures with skin like bark and limbs that moved too smoothly. At first I thought they were people wearing strange clothes, but as they got closer, I realized their bodies were actually made of wood and leaves. They looked almost like trees that had pulled themselves out of the ground and learned to walk. "Run," I whispered to Megan. She didn't move. She just stared, her mouth hanging open. The creatures didn't chase us. They didn't have to. They just watched with eyes like dark knots in wood as more of them emerged from the forest. We backed away slowly until we reached the tower. Once inside, I locked the door and tried the radio again. This time, someone answered. "This is Ranger Station 7. We're sending a search and rescue team to your location. Reports of missing hikers in your area. Hold tight." I nearly cried with relief. "You need to hurry," I told them. "There's something wrong with the forest." That night, Megan and I watched from the tower windows as the creatures communicated with each other. They didn't speak. Instead, they would touch the ground, and seconds later, trees would sway miles away, like they were passing messages through the roots. "They're not separate things," Megan said softly. "They're all one thing, the whole forest." In the morning, we found roots growing up through the floorboards of the tower, thin at first, like veins spreading across the wood. When I tried to cut them, a thick, clear sap oozed out that smelled like copper. By noon, Megan was gone. I found her outside, half sunk into the trunk of a massive pine tree. Roots were slowly pulling her in, wrapping around her legs and waist. Her eyes were open, but empty. "They showed me everything, Julia," she whispered. "The forest is so old. It's been here since before people, and it remembers." I tried to pull her free, but the roots only tightened. "What about Brandon?" I asked. A smile spread across her face. "He's part of it now. We all will be." I heard helicopter blades in the distance. The search and rescue team was coming. I ran back to the tower to grab my flare gun, firing a bright red signal into the sky. The helicopter landed in the clearing with the fallen trees. 4 people in bright orange jackets jumped out. I ran to them, trying to explain what was happening, but they just looked at me like I was crazy. "Ma'am, we're here about the missing hikers," one of them said. "Brandon and Megan Davis?" "This way," I said, leading them toward where I'd left Megan, but she was gone. The tree stood alone, with no sign anyone had ever been there. "They were here," I insisted. "The forest took them." The team leader looked concerned. "Let's head back to the tower. You've been alone up here for a while, right? That can play tricks on your mind." As we walked back, I noticed the paths were changing again. The trees seemed to shift when no one was looking directly at them. The team got separated. First one member disappeared, then another. "Stay close!" the leader shouted. But it was too late. We were lost. Night fell and we made camp, unable to find our way back to the tower or the helicopter. That's when we saw one of the missing team members walking toward us through the trees, but something was wrong. He moved stiffly, and his skin had a greenish tint. "I found the way back," he said in a flat voice. The team leader stood up. "Great! Lead the—" He never finished his sentence. A tree burst up through the ground beneath him, punching through his body like it had grown there in seconds. Blood ran down the trunk as he hung there, eyes wide with shock. The other team member wasn't human anymore. Bark spread across his face as he smiled, branches sprouting from his shoulders. I ran. Behind me, the last rescue team member screamed, then went silent. Somehow, I found my way back to the tower. Inside, I grabbed my files, flipping through reports, until I found what I was looking for, notes about Charlie's death. The official report said he died in a climbing accident. But here, in the private ranger notes, it said he'd gone missing in this exact same forest 6 months ago. The forest hadn't just taken Brandon and Megan. It had taken Charlie, too. Outside, the trees were moving again, closing in around the tower. The creatures stood at the edge of the clearing, watching me with their hollow eyes. Through the window, I saw Aiden approaching. I ran outside, desperate for help. "My family has been watching this forest for generations," he said quietly. "We perform the rituals, we give it what it needs, but it's growing stronger." "What is it?" I asked. "Not what. Who? This forest is alive, really alive. Not just trees, but one mind spread across miles of land. And it's hungry. It takes people, absorbs them, learns from them." As if to prove his point, one of the creatures stepped forward. This one was different. It had Brandon's face, perfectly formed from bark and leaves. "Julia," it said in Brandon's voice, "join us." More creatures appeared, all with familiar faces. Megan, the rescue team, and then "Charlie?" I whispered. My partner stood before me just as I remembered him, but made of wood and leaves. He reached out a hand. "It doesn't hurt," he said. "The forest shows you everything, all its memories, all the people it's taken. We're all still here, together." I backed away. "This isn't real." Aiden grabbed my arm. "The heart tree, it's the center of everything. If you can reach it, maybe you can stop this. It's a huge oak in the middle of the forest, older than all the rest." The creatures were closing in. Charlie's wooden face smiled at me. I ran. Behind me, I heard Aiden scream. Then nothing. I don't know how long I ran. Hours? Days? The forest kept changing around me, trying to confuse me, but somehow I found it. A massive oak tree, its trunk wider than a car, with roots that spread out like giant fingers across the ground. I had brought gasoline from the tower's emergency supplies. As I approached the heart tree, I felt a pressure in my head, like something trying to get inside my thoughts. The tree's bark split open. Inside was a hollow space, and in that space was the previous ranger who had disappeared. Half his body was merged with the wood, roots growing through his skin. His eyes opened. "You can be part of it," he said. "I chose this. You can too." Behind me, Charlie appeared again. "We can be together, Julia, forever." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to give in, to join Charlie in whatever existence the forest offered. But then I saw spores floating in the air around me, tiny seeds drifting from the creatures' bodies. I had already breathed them in. I could feel something changing inside me, a tingling under my skin. "No," I said. I poured the gasoline around the base of the heart tree and lit a match. The fire caught quickly, racing up the ancient trunk. The creatures screamed, not with voices, but with the sound of wood splitting and cracking. The pressure in my head became unbearable. Charlie's wooden face contorted in pain. "Julia, please!" I watched as the heart tree burned. All around me, the creatures fell to the ground, their wooden bodies breaking apart. In the distance, trees began to shift and move, as if in pain. The fire spread faster than any natural fire should. It was like the forest's connection was feeding it, carrying it along paths I couldn't see. I collapsed, coughing. My skin felt wrong, tight and rough. I looked down at my hands and saw tiny roots beginning to grow beneath my skin, tracing patterns along my veins. I had destroyed the heart tree, but I had breathed in the spores. The forest was inside me now. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. They told me they had found me unconscious at the edge of a burned section of forest. A massive wildfire had destroyed hundreds of acres, but stopped suddenly, as if hitting an invisible wall. That was 3 months ago. I quit my job as a ranger. The Deadfall Tower was rebuilt and someone new has taken my position. The doctors say I'm fine. They can't explain the strange patterns under my skin or why plants seem to grow better when I'm around. They don't know why I dream of roots and soil and ancient memories that aren't mine. Sometimes, when I walk in the woods near my new home, I can feel the trees leaning toward me, waiting. I know the truth. The heart tree is gone, but the forest isn't dead. It's just changed, evolved, and part of it is inside me. Last week I saw the new ranger in town buying supplies. I watched from across the street as they loaded up their truck, getting ready for their first day at Deadfall Tower. I should have warned them. I should have told them to run, to never set foot in that forest. Instead, I smiled and waved, and somewhere deep inside me, the forest smiled too. My name is Thomas Harrington. After spending 2 years in Korea, watching men die in ways no human should ever see, I decided I'd had enough of people. The screams followed me home, in my sleep, in the sudden backfire of a car, in the innocent bang of a door slamming shut. The doctors called it combat fatigue, but I knew better. It was guilt wrapped in fear, preserved in memories I couldn't shake. That's why I bought this old farmstead tucked away in an Appalachian valley so deep the sun doesn't hit the bottom until mid-morning. The real estate agent seemed surprised. When I paid cash, even more surprised when I didn't haggle over the price. He kept dancing around why the place had been empty since 1937. But I didn't care. Empty was what I wanted. Empty and quiet and far from everything. Just so you know, he said as he handed me the keys, the Wilkins family just up and disappeared one day. Left clothes hanging on the line and dinner on the table. Some folks around here say the place is cursed. I almost laughed. After what I'd seen overseas, a farmer's ghost story didn't scare me much. The first week I spent my time cleaning the 2-story farmhouse. It was strange. Everything was covered in 2 decades of dust, but underneath, it looked like someone had just stepped out for a minute. There were dishes stacked neatly in the cupboards, tools hanging in perfect order in the shed, and even a pair of reading glasses sitting on a Bible in the living room. My nearest neighbor, Ellis Montgomery, rode up on a mule 3 days after. I moved in. He was old as the hills, his face like dried leather, with eyes that had seen too much. He didn't waste time with small talk. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, not even bothering to get down from his mule. "And whatever you do, don't go into the North Woods. Not for hunting, not for exploring, not for anything." "Why's that?" I asked. He just stared at me for a long moment. "Some places ain't meant for people to go poking around in." Then he turned his mule and rode away. I shrugged it off and got to work clearing the overgrown fields. The soil surprised me, rich and black and somehow alive in a way I couldn't explain. When I turned it with my shovel, it seemed to move just a little too eagerly. Within days of planting my first seeds, green shoots were already pushing through. By the end of 2 weeks, my vegetable garden looked like it had been growing for months. "Never seen anything like it," I told myself, wiping sweat from my brow. "This soil's a miracle." It was while clearing the far field that I found the first bone. Not a small animal bone or even a deer bone. This was big, curved like a rib, but nearly as long as my arm. I set it aside, thinking it might be from an old cow or horse that had died on the property. But then I found another and another. None of them looked quite right for livestock. And strangest of all, when I brought my dog Rex over to sniff them, he tucked his tail and backed away, whining. Even the crows wouldn't land near them. I decided to explore the cellar next. The heavy wooden doors were swollen with moisture, and it took my full weight to drag them open. The smell that rushed out was thick. Not the rot I expected, but something earthier, like freshly turned soil, mixed with something metallic. My flashlight revealed row after row of preserved food in glass jars. What caught my eye weren't the contents, but the dates meticulously written on each label. They spanned from 1887 to 1937, 50 years of continuous canning. If the place had been abandoned in 37, who had been tending the farm and putting up preserves all those years? And why were some jars at the back filled with dark soil instead of food? That night, I dreamed of the fields. In my dream, I was standing in the moonlight, watching the corn I'd planted sway without any wind. The soil at my feet seemed to breathe, rising and falling in a slow rhythm. When I looked closer, I could see the ground was moving because something was tunneling just beneath the surface, circling around my feet. I woke up covered in sweat, the sheets twisted around me like roots. The next day, I decided to clean out the barn. Most of it was what you'd expect. Old tools, rotted hay, a rusted tractor, but at the back was a door I hadn't noticed before, secured with a heavy padlock that had somehow survived the years without rusting. What grabbed my attention were the marks on the inside of the door, deep gouges in the wood that looked like claw marks, as if something had been trying to get out. The lock wouldn't budge, even when I hit it with a hammer. Whatever was behind that door would stay hidden for now. That evening, as the sun was setting, I decided to visit Ellis. 3 miles was a good walk, but I needed answers. I found him on his porch, smoking a pipe, looking like he'd been expecting. "Me, you found something," he said. "It wasn't a question. The bones, the jars in the cellar, the locked room in the barn. None of it makes sense." I sat down on his porch steps. "And the soil? Crops don't grow that fast?" Ellis sighed, tapping his pipe against his chair. "The valley has always been fertile. That's why they chose it." "They?" He looked toward the dark line of trees to the north, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The hungry ones. They live in the old forest, but they harvest from the valley." "What are you talking about? Wild animals?" Ellis gave me a look that made my skin crawl. "They ain't wild, and they ain't exactly animals neither. They're older than the mountains. They need caretakers for their land, human hands to tend it." He leaned forward. "Why do you think the Wilkins disappeared? And the family before them, and before them? They didn't leave, Mr. Harrington. They were taken or changed, sometimes both." I stood up, angry now. "That's just superstitious nonsense." Ellis didn't rise to my anger. He just looked sad. "You'll see soon enough. The soil's already in you. I can tell by your eyes. They always start with the crops, make them grow too fast, make them different. Then they start reshaping whoever tends the fields." He pointed to my garden. "You've been eating what you grow, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I suddenly remembered the strange metallic taste of the tomatoes I'd harvested, how they seemed to pulse slightly when I cut into them. "It's too late to leave now," Ellis said quietly. "They know you're here. You're part of the harvest now." I walked home in the dark, telling myself the old man was crazy, that I'd bought a normal farm with some strange quirks. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, and as I neared my property, I could swear I saw tall, thin shapes moving at the edge of the north woods, their limbs too long to be human, their movements too fluid to be natural. That night, I lay awake listening to something scratching beneath the floorboards of my bedroom, like fingers or roots trying to find a way through. The weeks passed, and things on the farm got stranger. I started finding my crops changed in ways I couldn't explain. The corn grew faster than anything I'd ever seen. But when I peeled back, the husks, the kernels inside were blood red and seemed to glisten like they were wet. My tomatoes grew plump and ripe within days, but when I sliced them open for a sandwich, I swear I felt them pulse against the knife like they had a heartbeat. I told myself it was just some strange local soil condition. Maybe there were minerals in the ground that changed the plants, but deep down I knew better. One morning I found the first hole. It was a perfect circle about the size of a dinner plate, dug straight down into the earth near my back porch. I grabbed a stick and poked it inside, but couldn't feel the bottom. By the end of the week, there were 7 more holes scattered across my property, always appearing overnight. My chickens started disappearing too, one by one. Every night, I'd lock the coop tight, check the latches twice, and still wake up to find another chicken gone. No feathers, no blood, no sign of how anything got in. Just one less chicken, and sometimes a small pile of that rich black soil in its place. I started keeping my shotgun closer, not that it made me feel any safer. The worst part was the shadows. I'd see them at dusk, standing at the edge of the forest. Tall, thin shapes that looked almost like men, but with limbs too long and bent at odd angles. I'd raise my hand to wave, thinking it might be Ellis or someone from town, but they'd never wave back, just stand there watching. And when I'd walk toward them, they'd fade back into the trees. I was starting to think I was losing my mind when my sister Marlene showed up with her husband Richard and their boy Cody. They came bouncing up the dirt, rode in their station wagon, all smiles and surprise. "Tommy," Marlene squealed, jumping out to hug me. "We've been worried sick about you. No letters, no phone calls. Mum thinks you've turned into a hermit." I hugged her back, suddenly aware of how long it had been since I'd spoken to another person besides Ellis. "It's good to see you, Marley. Really good." Richard shook my hand, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He'd never served, never understood why I couldn't just get over what happened in Korea. "Place looks rustic," he said, eyeing the farmhouse. 8-year-old Cody didn't say much at first. He was a quiet kid, always had been. But as I showed them around the farm, I noticed him staring at the cornfield with an odd expression. "What's wrong with this place?" Marlene asked later that night as we sat on the porch. "It's so quiet. No birds singing, no crickets. And the air feels heavy, like right before a storm." I hadn't noticed it until she mentioned it, but she was right. The valley had a stillness that wasn't natural. "Probably just the mountains blocking the wind," I lied. The next morning, I found Cody standing in the cornfield talking. When I got closer, I realized he was having a full conversation, complete with pauses as if listening to responses. But there was nobody there. "Who are you talking to, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Cody looked up at me, his face perfectly serious. "The corn people. They live under the ground but can make the plants talk for them. They said they've been waiting for a boy my age." A chill ran down my spine. "That's just your imagination, Cody." He shook his head. "No, they're real. They showed me." He held out his hand. In his palm was a small tooth curved like a tiny fang. "They said I'll grow these soon." I took the tooth from him and threw it as far as I could into the field. No more playing out here alone, understand? That afternoon, Richard decided to try fishing in the stream that ran along the edge of my property. "I'll catch us some dinner," he announced, grabbing the fishing gear I kept in the shed. By sundown, he hadn't come back. Marlene wasn't worried at first. "You know, Richard probably lost track of time." But by midnight, with no sign of him, her face had grown pale with worry. I called the sheriff the next morning. By noon, half the men from town were searching the woods and fields. They found Richard's fishing pole stuck in the mud by the stream and one of his boots nearby. The boot was filled to the brim with that same rich black soil. No footprints, no blood, no sign of a struggle, just a boot full of dirt. Could he have fallen in the stream? Been dragged away by the current? The sheriff asked. But the stream was barely knee-deep and calm as glass. While the men continued searching, I noticed Cody back in the cornfield. I rushed over, grabbing his arm maybe too roughly. "I told you to stay out of here," I snapped. "But Daddy's with the corn people now," he said, his voice flat. "They're making him better." I felt sick. "What are you talking about?" "They put their seeds in him. He's growing." Cody's eyes looked different somehow. Darker, with tiny flecks of what looked like soil caught in the corners. That night, after the search party gave up and promised to return in the morning, I decided to dig anew. Well, I told Marlene it was because the old one was running low, but really, I needed to know what was under my farm. 3 feet down, my shovel broke through into emptiness. When I shone my flashlight into the hole, I saw a tunnel, perfectly smooth and round, large enough for a man to crawl through. And there were more tunnels branching off from it, like a giant ant colony running beneath my entire property. Something moved in the darkness down there, a skittering sound like many legs, or fingers scratching against dirt. I covered the hole as fast as I could and ran back to the house. "We're leaving," I told Marlene, my voice shaking. "Now, tonight." She didn't argue. She'd been feeling it too, the wrongness of the place. We threw some clothes into suitcases, put a confused Cody in the backseat of their station wagon, and drove toward town. But something happened to the roads. Every turn we took somehow brought us back toward the farm. Even roads I knew led to town kept twisting back, like the valley itself didn't want us to leave. After the 3rd time we ended up back at my front gate, Marlene started sobbing. "What's happening, Tommy? What is this place?" I held her close, feeling the vibration of the soil beneath our feet. "I don't know, Marley, but we're going to figure it out, I promise." Cody stood at the car window, looking out at the darkening fields with a strange little smile on his face. "The corn people say we can't leave," he whispered. "They say we're home now." That night, the harvest moon rose huge and orange over the valley. I couldn't sleep, so I sat on the porch with my shotgun across my knees, watching the cornfield sway. In a wind that wasn't there, around midnight they came. They stepped from the forest edge, tall, thin figures moving with a grace that made my stomach turn. In the moonlight, I could finally see them clearly. They looked almost human, but stretched out, with arms and legs too long and jointed in the wrong places. Their faces were the worst part, stretched forward like a dog's muzzle, but with human-like. Eyes that shone with a cold intelligence. The Dogmen. That's what I called them in my mind, though I'd never heard that name before. 5 of them crossed my field toward the house, the corn parting before them like water. When they reached the edge of my yard, they stopped and simply stood there, watching, waiting. I raised my shotgun, but found I couldn't pull the trigger. My hands shook too badly. One of them stepped forward. Its skin was the color of tree bark, cracked and weathered. When it opened its mouth, no sound came out, but I heard its voice inside my head. "Caretaker," it said, the word echoing in my skull. "We have waited for you to settle." "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "We are the first ones. We grew from this soil before your kind walked upright. We have always been here." As it spoke, I saw the ground around the creatures moving, roots and vines spiraling up from the earth to twist around their legs, like they were part of the land itself. "You've taken Richard," I said. "Where is he?" The lead creature tilted its head. "The male is becoming, as the boy will become, as you will become." A scream from inside the house broke our strange conversation. I ran inside to find Marlene standing in Cody's empty bedroom, staring at the window. It was open, the curtains billowing in the night breeze, and on the sill was a line of small, muddy footprints. "Something took him," she cried, grabbing my arm. "I heard him talking to someone, and when I came in, he was gone." I ran outside, shotgun ready, but the Dogmen had vanished. All that remained was a trail of disturbed soil leading from the house to the cornfield, like something had been dragged or had burrowed just beneath the surface. I followed the trail to the edge of the field, where it disappeared into one of those perfect circular holes. This one was larger than the others, big, enough for a child to fit through. "I'm going after him," I told Marlene, who had followed me outside. "I'm coming too," she said, her face set in determination despite the fear in her eyes. I knew I couldn't stop her. Cody was her son, and she'd crawl through hell itself to find him. We grabbed flashlights and rope from the shed. The hole led to the tunnel system I'd discovered earlier, but now it seemed even more vast, spreading out in all directions like a giant spider web beneath my farm. We followed the freshest marks in the tunnel floor, places where the soil had been recently disturbed. The air grew thicker the deeper we went, filled with the smell of damp earth and something else, something sweet and rotten at the same time. After what felt like hours of crawling through the darkness, the tunnel opened into a large underground chamber. My flashlight beam revealed a nightmare. The room was filled with people, or what had once been people. Some hung from the ceiling, suspended by thick roots that grew through their bodies. Others were half buried in the walls, their skin taking on the texture of bark or moss. A few moved slightly, showing they were still alive despite their horrible transformation. And among them, I recognized faces from old photographs I'd found in the farmhouse. The Wilkins family, the previous owners who had disappeared in 1937. "Thomas," Marlene gasped, pointing to a figure slumped against the far wall. It was Richard, or what remained of him. Roots had broken through his skin in dozens of places, connecting him to a massive oak root that ran through the center of the chamber. His eyes were open but cloudy, and when he saw us, he didn't seem to recognize us. "Richard!" Marlene rushed to him, but I held her back. "Don't touch him," I warned. "Look at his skin." Richard's flesh had taken on a greenish hue, and in places it had hardened into something like tree bark. When he moved his arm, it creaked like wood. "What's happening to him?" Marlene whispered. Before I could answer, a flood of images filled my mind, visions of ancient forests, of hunts in prehistoric valleys, of roots spreading through soil over centuries. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the mental assault. The dogmen were in the chamber with us now, emerging from holes in the walls. The leader approached, its bark-like hand reaching toward me. "You see now," its voice echoed in my head. "We bond. With your kind, we share, we grow together." I understood then. They weren't just taking people, they were joining with them, creating some kind of horrible hybrid, a symbiotic relationship where humans provided something the creatures needed, and in return, they were changed. "Where's Cody?" Marlene demanded, her voice breaking the strange spell. As if in answer, a small figure stepped from behind the lead dogman. It was Cody, but his eyes had changed. They were completely black now, like pools of oil. He smiled at us, and I saw small points in his mouth where his teeth had begun to sharpen. "Mom," he said, his voice eerily normal, "look what I can do." He held out his hand, and the soil at his feet began to move, swirling upward to form shapes, before collapsing back to the ground. "The soil listens to me now," he said proudly. "They showed me how." Marlene reached for him, but he stepped back. "Don't be afraid," he said. "They're not bad. They just need us to help them take care of their home. They've been here forever, and something worse lives in the deep woods, something they keep away." Another dogman stepped forward, this one more human-like than the others, though its body was nearly completely covered in bark. With a shock, I recognized the face beneath the wooden mask. It was the man from the photograph in the farmhouse, the owner who had disappeared in 1937. "I am the caretaker before you," his voice whispered in my mind. "We are not separate. We are becoming one with the soil, with the trees, with the very land itself." He gestured around the chamber. "We are not victims. We are chosen." I felt sick. "You're monsters," I spat. "You've been taking people for God knows how long." The transformed man tilted his head. "No, we preserve them. The soil preserves what it loves." Suddenly Marlene cried out. I turned to see her examining a cut on her arm. But instead of blood, thick black soil was seeping from the wound. "Tommy," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "What's happening to me?" Before I could reach Marlene, a commotion erupted from one of the tunnels. 3 men with hunting rifles burst into the chamber, trespassers from a neighboring town who'd heard about Richard's disappearance and decided to search on their own. "What in God's name?" one of them started to say before his eyes fell on the dogman. The lead hunter raised his rifle and fired at the nearest creature. The bullet hit the ancient oak root that ran through the center of the chamber, the same root connected to Richard and several others. A terrible shriek filled the air, not coming from any mouth, but vibrating up through the ground itself. The dogmen moved with shocking speed, surrounding the hunters before they could fire again. I grabbed Marlene's hand and pulled her behind a stone column, Cody trailing behind us with an eerie calm. What happened next will haunt me forever. The creatures didn't attack with claws or teeth. Instead, the ground beneath the hunters simply opened up, swallowing them to their waists. Roots shot up from the soil, wrapping around their arms and necks, pulling them deeper. Their screams didn't last long. When it was over, the lead dogman turned to us, its eyes glowing with anger. "They damaged the elder root," it said in my mind. "The balance is threatened." I noticed then that the root the hunter had shot was leaking a thick amber fluid, and all around us the transformed people hanging from the ceiling were writhing in pain, including Richard. "Your war memories," the creature continued, fixing its gaze on me. "The things you saw in Korea, that is why you resist us. The trauma makes your mind less open to our call." I realized with a chill that it was right. My nightmares, the horrors. I'd tried to escape by coming here. They had somehow protected me from whatever was happening, to Marlene and Cody. "You will join us eventually," it said. "The soil is already in your garden, in your food, in your blood. Even now it changes you." I looked down at my hands and saw thin, root-like veins visible beneath my skin, pulsing with each heartbeat. "You need me?" I said suddenly, understanding flooding through me. "You need human caretakers. That's why you haven't just killed us all." The dogman tilted its head. "We protect this valley from the deep ones in the northern woods. We have kept the balance for 10,000 years, but we cannot maintain our territory without human hands to tend it." Outside, thunder rolled across the valley as a storm gathered. The creatures looked up, suddenly anxious. "Water weakens us," the dogman said. "We must return to the Elder Oak." They retreated through various tunnels, leaving us alone with the half-transformed Richard and the bodies hanging from the ceiling. "We need to get out of here," I told Marlene, who was staring at the soil still seeping from her cut. "But Richard, Cody," she whispered. Cody took her hand. "It's okay, Mom. This is better. I can feel everything now, every plant, every bug in the soil. It doesn't hurt." I saw the decision forming in Marlene's eyes. "Tommy, get us back to the house. I have an idea." We made our way back through the tunnels as the storm broke overhead. Rain pounded the earth, and I could feel vibrations through the soil, as if the ground itself was in pain. At the house, Marlene went straight to my shed. "Pesticides," she said, "chemicals, anything toxic to plants." I understood immediately. "The oak. If we poison the main root system, we might be able to stop this," she finished. We gathered everything we could find: weed killer, rat poison, old motor oil, anything that might damage the root system. But as we prepared to return to the tunnels, I noticed Marlene's eyes. Black soil was seeping into the whites, turning them darker. "You're changing faster than me," I said quietly. She nodded, her face calm despite everything. "I know, I can feel it, like there's soil instead of blood in my veins now." She looked at the bottles of chemicals in her hands. "That's why it has to be me, Tommy. I'm already part of them." "What are you talking about?" "I need to get these chemicals to the heart of their root system, to the Elder Oak." She kissed my cheek. "Take care of Cody if you can save him." Before I could stop her, she was gone, disappearing into one of the tunnel entrances with all our chemicals. Thunder shook the house as the storm intensified. Rain came down in sheets, flooding the fields and turning the yard into mud. I looked for Cody, but couldn't find him anywhere in the house. Then I remembered Ellis. Maybe he would know what to do. I slogged through the storm to his cabin, but found it empty. In his bedroom, I discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a journal, its pages yellow with age. The first entry was dated 1823. The journal revealed the horrible truth. Ellis's family had been making deals with the dogmen for centuries, protecting themselves by offering other families, like mine, as caretakers. The Montgomerys would find people to buy the farm, then wait for the creatures to take them. In exchange, the dogmen allowed the Montgomerys to live in peace. Ellis was far older than he appeared. The creatures had been preserving him, keeping him alive to maintain their supply of caretakers. A massive boom shook the earth, and I ran outside to see a geyser of that amber fluid shooting up from the ground near my barn. Marlene had reached the Elder Root. I raced back toward my farm as the ground began to shake. Great cracks opened in the fields, revealing the vast tunnel network below. The dogmen were emerging from every hole, their bodies convulsing as the poison spread through their root system. And in the middle of it all stood Cody, his small body now more plant than human, bark-like skin covering most of his frame. The creatures were gathering around him, touching him with their long fingers. They're trying to use him as their new core, I realized. A new elder. I had to make an impossible choice, try to save what remained of my nephew or end this cycle. Forever. The rain gave me the answer. The dogmen feared water. Their tunnel system was flooding rapidly. If I could flood it completely, I ran to the old dam at the edge of my property, a small structure built to control the stream. With my bare hands, I tore it apart, unleashing a torrent of water toward the fractured fields. The water rushed into every crack and hole, flooding the underground chamber. The dogmen shrieked, a sound like trees breaking in a storm as they tried to retreat. I watched from higher ground as a massive sinkhole opened in the center of my farm, swallowing the barn, half the cornfield, and the creatures along with. Cody was the last to disappear, reaching one bark-covered hand toward me as the earth claimed him. When the water finally receded days later, nothing remained of the dogmen, the tunnels, or their victims. Just a deep depression in the earth where my farm had been. I left the valley that day and never returned. But 10 years later, I heard a story that made my blood freeze. A new family had purchased the abandoned property, rebuilding on higher ground, away from the sinkhole. They'd found the soil remarkably fertile, and every morning, no matter how many times they filled it in, a single child's footprint would appear in the mud outside their home. My name is Frank Kowalski. I used to cut down trees for a living until 6 months ago, when my whole world fell apart. Sarah, my wife of 12 years, died when a truck smashed into her car on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. After that, nothing made sense anymore. I couldn't sleep in our bed, couldn't eat at our table, couldn't even look at the photos on our walls. That's when I remembered my grandfather's old cabin up in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon. He left it to me years ago, but I never had a reason to use it. Now it felt like the only place I could go to escape the crushing weight of my memories. The cabin sits in a valley that not many people know about. The locals call it Echo Valley on account of how sound bounces off the mountain walls in strange ways. When I was a kid, my grandfather told me stories about 3 hikers who disappeared there back in the 1950s. They went in, but never came out. Search parties found nothing but a single boot next to a cave entrance. It took me 2 days to drive to the cabin from Portland. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, and finally disappeared altogether. I had to hike the last mile carrying everything I needed. When I finally reached the clearing, the cabin looked sad and forgotten. The porch sagged in the middle. Vines crawled up the walls. Nature was trying to reclaim it. Inside wasn't much better. Dust covered everything. A family of raccoons had been living in the kitchen. But I didn't care. The work would keep my hands busy and my mind quiet. And that's all I wanted. For 3 weeks straight, I fixed that cabin. I replaced rotting boards, patched the roof, and cleared out years of leaves and dirt. While scraping old wallpaper in the bedroom, I found strange markings carved into the wood beneath. They looked like stick figures with 2 long arms and legs, reaching for something above them. I figured my grandfather must have let me draw on the walls as a kid, though I didn't remember doing it. When my supplies ran low, I drove to the nearest town, about an hour away. The general store there had everything I needed: canned food, tools, batteries for my radio. The woman behind the counter had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen too much. "You're Frank Kowalski's grandson, aren't you?" she asked as she rang up my items. "You look just like him." "Yes, ma'am. Name's Frank, too. I'm Mabel Jenkins. Known your grandfather since we were kids." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You staying up at his cabin?" I nodded. "Be careful up there. Watch out for the mimics." "The what?" She just shook her head. "Never mind, old folks' tales. Just, if you hear something strange in those woods, don't follow it, no matter what it sounds like." I didn't think much of her warning then. Figured she was just a superstitious old woman. I wish I'd listened more carefully. Back at the cabin, I found a loose floorboard in the main room. Hidden underneath was a leather-bound journal. My grandfather's handwriting filled every page. Most entries were normal enough. Weather reports, notes about hunting, sketches of plants. But then I found entries from his last years at the cabin, June 12th, 1965. Heard Sarah's voice again last night. Called my name from the tree line. Impossible. She's been dead 3 years. Must be losing my mind. June 20th, 1965. They're getting better at it. Whatever they are, the voices sound more real now. Today I heard my own voice coming from the shed, but I was sitting right here by the fire. July 3rd, 1965. They can mimic anything. The cry of a hawk, the sound of my axe, even the way old Tom Parker used to laugh. Perfect copies, but there's something wrong beneath the sounds. Something hungry. I closed the journal, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. My grandfather had never mentioned any of this to me. He'd moved back to town when I was still young, said the isolation was too much for him. Now I wondered if there had been another reason. That night, I woke to the sound of my axe hitting wood. Chop, 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 steady and rhythmic. But I was in bed, and my axe was leaning against the wall right next to me. The sound came from outside, near the wood pile. I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun, then slowly opened the door. The clearing was empty. The woodpile sat undisturbed. Nothing moved in the darkness, but as I turned to go back inside, I heard it again. Chop. Only this time, it came from behind. Me, when I was looking at the woodpile. I spun around, but again nothing was there. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. I'd hear footsteps on the porch when no one was there. The radio would catch fragments of conversations I hadn't had, and one morning, I found footprints circling the cabin, footprints that matched my boots exactly, down to the worn spot on the left heel. But I hadn't walked around the cabin the night before. Then the storm hit. Rain pounded the roof like it wanted to break through. Lightning turned night to day, and thunder shook the windows in their frames. That's when I heard someone banging on my door. He was soaked to the bone, this stranger. Said his name was Riley. He was a hunter who got turned around in the storm. Thank God, he said, dripping water onto my floor. I thought I was going to die out there. I gave him dry clothes, hot coffee, and a place by the fire. As the night wore on and the storm raged outside, Riley got talking. Said he'd been hunting in these mountains for 20 years, but had never seen a storm come up so fast. That's not the strangest thing, though, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Before I found your cabin, I heard my wife calling to me. From the trees, I felt my skin prickle. Your wife? She died last spring. Cancer. But I heard her clear as day, calling my name, saying she missed me, asking me to come to her. Riley's hands shook as he held his coffee mug. I followed her voice for almost an hour before I realized I was being led deeper into the forest, away from any trail. That's when I turned and ran. And then I found your place. We sat in silence after that, listening to the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. Eventually, Riley fell asleep on the couch, and I retreated to my bedroom, double-checking that my shotgun was loaded before I closed my eyes. I don't know what time it was when the screaming started. It jerked me from a deep sleep into instant heart-pounding awareness. Riley was screaming my name over and over. By the time I grabbed my gun and ran to the living room, the screaming had stopped. The couch was empty. The front door hung open, swinging in the wind. Rain and leaves had blown in, soaking the floor. And there, on the doorframe, were deep scratches. In the wood, as if someone or something had dug their fingers in while being dragged out. Beneath the scratches, a smear of blood glistened in the moonlight. I slammed the door shut and barricaded it with the couch. For the rest of that long night, I sat with my back to the wall and my shotgun across my knees, jumping at every creak and groan of the old cabin. As dawn broke, my radio suddenly crackled to life. Through the static, I heard my own voice. Don't understand what's happening. Riley's gone. There's blood everywhere. I think they took him. The mimics, they're real. God help me, they're real. But I hadn't said those words. Not yet. Morning came with a heavy fog that wrapped around the cabin like a blanket. After what happened to Riley, I should have packed up and left right then, but something kept me there. Maybe it was needing to know what happened. Maybe it was not wanting to go back to a world without Sarah. Either way, I made a choice that morning that I've been paying for ever since. I took my shotgun, a compass, and some water, and headed into the forest to look for Riley. The woods were too quiet. No birds sang, no squirrels darted between trees. Even the wind seemed afraid to rustle the leaves, just silence, broken only by my footsteps on the damp ground. I walked for nearly an hour before finding anything. There, caught on a thorn bush, was a scrap of fabric from the shirt I'd lent Riley. 20 yards further, I found his backpack. The canvas was torn open, like something had ripped through it with claws or teeth. His supplies were scattered everywhere. "Riley," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast silence. "Help me, Frank." Riley's voice answered immediately. I spun toward the sound, raising my shotgun. Nothing was there, just trees and mist. "Please, I'm hurt," Riley's voice called again. This time from behind me. I turned again, heart racing. Still nothing. Then I heard it again, and again, and again. Riley's voice calling for help from every direction at once. Perfect copies of his voice, down to the way he said my name. But that's not possible. No echo could do that. I started running, trying to get away from the voices. But they followed me, growing louder. I tripped over a root and fell hard, the shotgun slipping from my hands and sliding down a small hill. As I scrambled after it, the forest suddenly went dead quiet. The silence hit me like a physical thing. 1 second, the voices were everywhere. The next, nothing. Not just no voices, but no sound at all. It was like someone had turned off the volume of the world. I could see leaves moving in the breeze, but couldn't hear them rustling. I clapped, my hands near my ears, and barely heard a muffled thump, as if the sound was being eaten. That's when I saw the cave. It was half hidden behind a fallen tree, its entrance black against the grey stone of the mountainside. Around the opening, someone had painted pictures in red. They looked old, really old, the kind of thing you'd see in museums about ancient peoples. The drawings showed tall, skinny figures with long arms and legs. Some had their mouths open wide, with smaller figures being pulled into them. I knew I should turn back. Everything in me screamed to run. But I thought of Riley, who might still be alive somewhere in these woods, and more selfishly, I thought of what would happen if I returned to the cabin alone, waiting for nightfall, with those things outside. So I grabbed a branch, wrapped a piece of my shirt around one end, and used my lighter to make a torch. Then I entered the cave. The tunnel sloped down steeply. The air grew colder with each step and smelled of whetstone and something else, something rotten. My torch cast jumping shadows on the walls, making it look like things were moving just out of sight. That's when the voices started again. But not Riley's this time. "Frank? Is dinner ready yet?" Sarah's voice. My wife's voice coming from deeper. In the cave. It was from a conversation we'd had 100 times. Her calling from the living room while I cooked in the kitchen. "Did you remember to get the good coffee? The one in the blue bag?" Another memory. Sarah's voice exactly as it had been that last morning before she drove to work, before the accident. Then my own voice echoed back, "I'll pick some up on the way home." These were our words, our private moments. How could anything know them? More voices floated up from the darkness. My mother, dead for 15 years, singing the lullaby she used to sing to me as a child. My grandfather telling me to be careful with his fishing rod. My high school coach yelling at me to run faster. Sounds from throughout my life played back. Perfectly, like a radio flipping through the stations of my memories. I nearly ran then, nearly dropped the torch and scrambled back up to the daylight, but a new sound stopped me. Footsteps coming from behind. Someone was entering the cave. I pressed myself against the wall, raising my shotgun. A beam of light cut through the darkness, and then a figure appeared. A man in a park ranger uniform. "Hello?" he called. "Anyone down here?" "Here," I said. stepping forward, relief washing over me. "I'm here." The ranger's flashlight blinded me for a moment. "Frank Kowalski? From the cabin up on the ridge? How do you know my name?" "We've been looking for you, sir, and for a hunter named Riley Johnston. His truck was found abandoned on a Forest Service road 2 days ago." The ranger introduced himself as Dawson and explained that after finding Riley's truck, they'd begun searching the area. "One of the other rangers had heard about my grandfather's cabin and thought Riley might have sought shelter there. "We need to get out of here," I said. "There's something in these woods, something dangerous." Dawson nodded, but something about the movement seemed off. Too smooth or maybe too jerky. I couldn't put my finger on it. "We'll head back to your cabin first," he said. "I need to radio my team from there." As we walked back through the forest, I told Dawson everything. The strange echoes, the footprints, Riley's disappearance, and the voices in the cave. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, but never asking questions. When we reached the cabin, something felt wrong. The door I'd barricaded was wide open, the couch moved back to its original spot. Had someone been here while I was gone? Dawson stepped inside first. I followed, shutting the door behind us. The ranger moved around the cabin, looking at everything with an intensity that made me uneasy. "Can you radio your team now?" I asked. "In a minute," he said, his voice sounding different somehow. Flatter, I watched him examine the carvings I'd found under the wallpaper. He ran his fingers over them, almost lovingly. "My grandfather made those," I said, trying to fill the increasingly uncomfortable silence. "No," Dawson said without turning around. "They're much older than that." A chill ran down my spine. How would he know that? I glanced at the window behind Dawson and froze. The glass showed the room behind him, my kitchen table, the wood stove, the rifle rack on the wall. But no Dawson. Where his reflection should have been, there was nothing. My heart nearly stopped. I forced myself to look normal, to breathe evenly, while my mind raced. I needed to get out, to get away from whatever was wearing Dawson's shape. "I'll make some coffee," I said, moving toward the kitchen. "You must be cold after being out in that weather." "That would be nice," Not Dawson said, still examining the carvings. In the kitchen, I quietly opened the drawer where I kept a hunting knife. I slipped it into my pocket just as Dawson came around the corner. "No need for coffee, Frank," he said, but the voice wasn't quite right anymore. It had a strange echo to it, as if two voices were speaking at once. Dawson's and something else, underneath, and his face. For just a second it seemed to shift, like there was another face trying to push through from inside, something with too many angles, too many teeth. "I think I should check on that coffee," I said, backing away slowly. Not Dawson smiled, and his mouth stretched too wide for a human face. "We've been waiting for you, Frank, for a long, long time." I ran through the kitchen, down the short hallway, and into the cellar. I slammed the heavy oak door and shot the bolt home, just as something slammed against it from the other side. The whole door shuddered in its frame. "Frank!" Sarah's voice called from the other side of the door. "Frank, please let me in. I miss you so much, baby. Please!" I pressed my hands over my ears and huddled in the corner of the cellar, as the thing that wasn't Dawson spent the next 3 hours trying to trick me into opening the door. I must have fallen asleep in that cellar, because when I opened my eyes, sunlight was streaming through the small window near the ceiling. The pounding on the door had stopped, the voices too. Just silence. I waited another hour before working up the courage to unlock the door. The cabin was empty. Ranger Dawson, or whatever had been pretending to be him, was gone. But the cabin didn't feel empty. It felt like the walls themselves were watching me. I went outside, desperate for fresh air, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Hundreds of them all around the cabin. And they were all mine. The exact pattern of my boot soles, the exact size, the exact wear pattern. But the footprints formed impossible paths. Some walked up the walls of the cabin. Others started in the middle of the clearing with no tracks leading to them. Some even overlapped, as if multiple versions of me had been walking in the same spot. I knew then that I was dealing with something beyond my understanding. The mimics my grandfather wrote about, the things Mabel warned me about, they were real, and they weren't just copying sounds, they were copying me. As I stood there trying to make sense of it all, I heard voices in the distance, human voices, real ones. I ran toward them, hope flaring in my chest for the first time in days. 3 hikers came into view on the old trail that passed near my cabin. 2 guys and a girl, college age by the look of them, with big backpacks and hiking poles. They seemed surprised to see me rushing toward them. "Hey there," the taller guy said. "We heard someone calling for help." "Was that you?" I shook my head slowly. "I didn't call for anyone." "That's weird," the girl said. "We all heard it. Sounded like someone was hurt." My blood ran cold. "You need to come with me right now. All of you. It's not safe out here." They exchanged looks, clearly wondering if I was the dangerous one. But something in my face must have convinced them, because they followed me back to the cabin. Inside, I told them everything, expecting them to laugh or back away slowly. But they didn't. The girl, Jessica, was studying folklore at Portland State. She'd heard stories about Echo Valley. "There are legends about creatures in these mountains," she said. "The old-timers called them Wendigos or skinwalkers, but every culture has stories about beings that can mimic human voices to lure people away." "We should call for help," said Mark, the taller guy. He pulled out his cell phone, but there was no service. My radio had stopped working too. "It's going to be dark soon," said the 3rd hiker, Dave. "Maybe we should all stay here tonight and hike out at first light?" I agreed, though I knew in my heart it was already too late. The mimics had found new prey. We took turns keeping watch that night. Dave volunteered for the first shift while the rest of us tried to sleep. I was just drifting off when a scream jerked me back to consciousness. Dave was gone. The front door was wide open. Mark and Jessica were already up, grabbing flashlights. "We have to find him," Jessica said, heading for the door. I tried to stop them. "That's what they want. They're luring us out there." But they wouldn't listen. They went outside, calling Dave's name. I had no choice but to follow, shotgun in hand. We found Dave about 50 yards from the cabin. At least, we found what was left of him. His body lay in a small clearing, but it didn't look right. His skin seemed to be moving, rippling like water. And as we watched in horror, his mouth opened and Dave's voice came out. "Guys, something's wrong. I can't feel my legs." But his lips didn't match the words. Mark ran forward to help his friend. I tried to stop him, but I was too slow. As soon as Mark touched Dave, Dave's body seemed to collapse inward, like a balloon deflating. At the same time, something rose up behind Mark. Something tall and thin with too many joints in its limbs. It had no face, just a slash of a mouth that opened wider than should be possible. In one quick motion, it wrapped around Mark. I heard a sound like wet paper tearing, and then Mark's screams stopped. The thing that used to be Dave stood up, now, looking exactly like Mark. Next to it, the real Mark's body lay crumpled on the ground, empty somehow, like a suit of clothes with nothing inside. Jessica screamed. The sound seemed to excite the creatures. The fake Mark turned toward us, its movements all wrong, too fluid, like it had no bones. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Jessica's arm. We sprinted back toward the cabin, the thing that looked like Mark following at a leisurely pace, as if it knew we couldn't escape. Just as we reached the porch, a high-pitched tone cut through the air. Every window in the cabin shattered at once, spraying glass everywhere. The sound was so pure, so perfect it made my ears hurt. The fake Mark had made that sound, a pitch that broke glass. We barricaded ourselves in the cellar again. Jessica was in shock, shaking and crying. I wasn't much better. "What are they?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, "but they're not just mimicking our sounds. They're taking our shapes, our memories. I told her about my grandfather's journal, how he'd described the mimics getting better at copying over time. This isn't the first time they've hunted here, I said. Those hikers that disappeared in the 50s, my grandfather, Riley, they've been feeding on people in this valley for years. But why didn't your grandfather warn anyone? Why keep it secret? That question had been bothering me too. I pulled out the journal again, reading entries I'd skipped before. What I found chilled me to the bone. October 15th, 1965. I have to leave this place, have to warn others. They've gotten too good, too perfect. Last night I found myself having a conversation with myself on the porch, but I was inside the whole time. They've learned to make copies of me. October 16th, 1965. No one will believe me. They'll think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. Maybe none of this is real. October 18th, 1965. I'm not sure which one I am anymore, the real Frank or the copy. We have the same memories, same thoughts. If I am the copy, would I even know? Would I feel any different? The final entry was in different handwriting. October 20th, 1965. I am Frank Kowalski. I am returning to town tomorrow. I will live among the humans. I will wait for my grandson to come to the cabin. He will feed us well. My grandfather didn't. Die of old age in a nursing home, I said, my voice shaking. He never left this mountain. The thing that went back to town, the thing that I grew up calling Grandpa. It wasn't him. Jessica stared at me, horror dawning on her face. Then these things, they can live among us, pass as human, as long as they've heard enough, learned enough. I felt sick. That's why they play back our memories, our voices. They're learning us. A new sound came from upstairs. Footsteps, multiple sets, walking around the cabin. But what scared me more was that one set of footsteps sounded exactly like mine. The slight drag of my left foot from an old logging injury, the weight of my step. Perfect. They're all around us, Jessica whispered. We're not getting out of here. Yes, we are, I said, though I didn't believe it. We just need to figure out their weakness. The creatures outside began to speak, using the voices of everyone they'd taken. Dave, Mark, Riley, Ranger Dawson, even my grandfather and my wife. A chorus of stolen voices calling to us, trying to trick us into opening the door. If they could just break down the door, they would, I realized. They need us to let them in. They need permission somehow. Jessica nodded, thinking. In the old stories, evil things often need to be invited in. Vampires can't enter a home unless asked. Maybe these creatures have similar rules. As the night wore on, the voices grew more desperate, more pleading. They used every emotional trick they could. Fear, guilt, sympathy. My wife's voice begging me to save her. Mark's voice telling Jessica he was still alive, just hurt. But we held firm. When dawn came, the voices stopped. But we didn't dare leave our shelter. Instead, Jessica and I began to piece together what we knew about the creatures. They could mimic any sound perfectly. They could copy physical appearances. They seemed to absorb memories from their victims. They needed permission to enter protected spaces, and they couldn't create, only copy. That's it, Jessica said suddenly. They can't copy what they haven't heard. They can only mimic what already exists. So they're just really good mockingbirds? I said. No, it's more than that. Think about it. They copy everything, sounds, shapes, memories, but they can't create something new. They can't make silence. I thought about it. The cave. When I was in there was that moment where all sound just stopped, like it was being absorbed. Exactly. Jessica's eyes lit up. I bet they feed on sound somehow, on our essence expressed through sound. That's why they need to hear us, to learn us, before they can become us. Our conversation was interrupted by a new voice from upstairs, Jessica's voice, perfectly mimicked down to the excited way she'd just been talking. That's not possible, she whispered. It can't copy me. It hasn't heard enough of me yet, but it had. Because as the fake Jessica continued talking upstairs, I realized it was repeating a conversation I'd had with my wife years ago. A private moment no one else could have heard. Unless... "You're one of them," I whispered, backing away from Jessica. Her face showed genuine confusion. "What? No! Frank, I'm real." "Prove it. Tell me something they couldn't know. Something that happened to you that I wasn't there for." I grew up in Seattle. I have a dog named Charlie. I'm studying folklore because my grandmother used to tell me stories. "No," I cut her off. "That's all stuff you could have made up or taken from the real Jessica's memories." Her eyes hardened then, and her mouth stretched into that too wide smile. "You're smarter than your grandfather was, Frank. He never figured it out until it was too late." I raised my shotgun, but fake Jessica moved with impossible speed. She was on me before I could pull the trigger, her hands wrapping around my throat. Up close, I could see her skin shifting, like there was something moving underneath. I managed to hit her with the butt of the shotgun, knocking her back. She hissed, an inhuman sound, and lunged at me again. I fired, the blast deafening in the small cellar. Fake Jessica's body jerked, but instead of blood, black oil-like liquid sprayed from the wound. Her form began to lose shape, melting like a candle in the sun. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran up the stairs, through the cabin and outside, only to find myself surrounded by copies. Copies of Riley, Dawson, Mark, Dave, and me. 5 versions of me, all with my face, my clothes, my expressions. My mind broke a little bit then. How could I fight myself? How could I know which memories were mine and which were copied? Had I ever been real, or was I just another copy, thinking I was the original? The creatures didn't attack. They just stood there, watching me with hungry eyes. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my shotgun moving from one target to another, unsure. Where to aim? The copy that looked like Ranger Dawson spoke, its voice shifting between Dawson's and something older, rougher. "We have always been here, before the trees, before the mountains. We feed, we learn, we become. Why my family? Why did you take my grandfather?" "Strong sounds," it said, "strong memories, good feeding." Another copy, one that looked like me, stepped forward. "Sarah was going to leave you, Frank. Did you know that? She had packed a bag the day she died. We saved you from that pain. We brought you here so you could join us." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "You're lying." "We don't lie. We can't create, only copy." She told her sister on the phone that morning. We heard her. Just like we heard the truck driver's thoughts before we pushed his truck into her car. The world seemed to tilt around me. "You killed her. You killed Sarah to get me here?" All the copies smiled at once, those terrible too wide smiles. "We've been waiting for you, Frank, for a long time." I fired the shotgun at the nearest copy, the one with Sarah's voice coming from my mouth. It dropped, its form melting like the fake Jessica had. The others lunged toward me, their limbs stretching and bending in impossible ways. I ran back into the cabin and locked the door, knowing it wouldn't hold them for long. My mind was racing. They had killed Sarah, had engineered this whole situation to lure me here. But why me? Looking around desperately for anything that might help, I noticed the cabin itself seemed wrong now. The walls were at odd angles that hurt my eyes to look at. The ceiling seemed higher than before. The whole structure was being warped somehow, as if the creatures were changing the physical reality around me. Then I saw the radio on the table. It was playing static, but through the noise I could hear fragments of conversations. My conversations, from the past, from the future, from realities that might never be. That's when it hit me. These things didn't just exist in the present. They were somehow connected to all times at once. Past, present, future. That's how they knew what would happen. That's how my radio picked Up things I hadn't said yet. The walls began to bleed black liquid as the creatures outside pressed against the cabin. The wood groaned as if in pain. I knew I had only minutes before they broke through. That's when I heard a pounding from below. From the cellar. Someone was alive down there. Despite everything, I opened the cellar door, gun raised. A young woman I'd never seen before stood at the bottom of the stairs, terrified but very much human. "Help me," she pleaded. "Please. I'm the real Jessica." I stood frozen at the top of the cellar stairs. This couldn't be the real Jessica. I'd just killed the real Jessica. Or had I? What if the thing I shot wasn't Jessica at all, but another copy? My head hurt trying to keep track of what was real. "How do I know you're really Jessica?" I called down. "I was hiking with Mark and Dave," she said quickly. "We heard someone calling for help. We came to your cabin. Something took Dave first, then Mark." She was crying now. "I ran when those things attacked. Found the cellar entrance from outside. There's a storm door hidden by some bushes. Please, we have to get out of here." Her story matched what I knew, but that didn't mean anything. These creatures could have taken her memories. Before I could decide what to do, the front door of the cabin burst open. 2 of my copies walked, in moving with that strange, fluid grace that looked all wrong. "Let's talk, Frank," one of them said. I slammed the cellar door shut and locked it, trapping Jessica below. I couldn't trust her, but I couldn't let the creatures get her either. "What are you?" I demanded, aiming my shotgun at the nearest copy. The copy tilted its head, studying me with my own eyes. "We are the first ones, the hungry ones. We were here before your kind crawled from the mud. What do you want from me?" "To join us," the other copy said. "Your grandfather was strong. His sounds were rich, full of memory. But you—" It smiled. "You are broken, full of pain. The best feeding we've had in generations." I fired my shotgun, but the copy moved impossibly fast, dodging the blast. The other copy stretched its arm, longer than any human arm should be, and knocked the gun from my hands. "We can give her back to you," the first copy said, and its face melted, reformed, became Sarah's, perfect down to the small scar above her eyebrow from a childhood fall. "Sarah," I whispered, even though I knew it wasn't her. "It's me, baby," the thing said in Sarah's voice. It even had her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. "I've missed you so much." Part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to give in, to accept this perfect copy as the real thing. What did it matter if she wasn't the original Sarah? She had all of Sarah's memories, all of her mannerisms. She was as close to Sarah as I would ever get. The Sarah copy held out her hand. "Come with me. We can be together again." I reached out, my fingers inches from hers. Then I remembered. These things had caused Sarah's death, had arranged the accident that took her from me. And now they were using her memory, her form, to try to trap me. I pulled my hand back. "You're not her." The Sarah copy's face hardened, then melted back into a copy of me. "We gave you a choice, Frank. Now we take what we want." Both copies lunged. At me. I dove for the shotgun, but I wasn't fast enough. One grabbed my ankle, its fingers elongating, wrapping around my leg like tentacles. The other landed on my back, surprisingly heavy. I felt something cold and wet pressing against the back of my neck, like a mouth, but wrong. Too wide, too fluid. Pain shot through my body as I felt something being drawn out of me, not blood. Something deeper, my memories, my voice, myself. Desperately, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my grandfather's lighter. With the last of my strength, I flicked it on and touched the flame to the copy holding my leg. It shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and released me. The creature burst into flames, its body bubbling and popping. The other copy jumped back, hissing. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the shotgun and fired. The blast hit the copy square in the chest, knocking it through the window. The cabin was starting to collapse around me, the walls bulging inward at impossible angles. Through the Broken window. I could see more copies gathering in the clearing, copies of everyone they'd taken. A pounding came from the cellar door. "Let me out!" Jessica screamed. "Please! They're coming in down here." I had no way of knowing if she was real or another copy, but I couldn't leave anyone down there, not even a stranger. I unlocked the door and stepped back, gun raised. Jessica burst out, wild-eyed with terror. "There's another way in down there, a tunnel. They're coming through it." "How do I know you're real?" I demanded, keeping my distance. "You don't," she said, "and I don't know if you're real either. But right now we both want to get out of here alive, and that's enough." She was right. We ran for the front door, but black oil-like liquid was seeping through the walls now, coating everything. The floor was beginning to dissolve. "This way," I said, heading for the back door that led to the forest. But as soon as I opened it, I saw they were waiting for us there too. Dozens of copies standing silently among the trees. "We're trapped," Jessica whispered. The copies began moving toward the cabin from all sides. We backed into the main room, where the floor was still solid. "What do we do?" Jessica asked, her voice breaking. I thought about what we'd learned. These creatures fed on sound. They needed to hear us, to learn us. They could copy anything they'd heard, but they couldn't create what didn't exist. And they had one major weakness. They couldn't mimic silence or absence. "Your grandmother's stories," I said suddenly. "The folklore you studied. Did any of them mention how to kill these things?" Jessica shook her head. "Just that they hate silence, that they need sound to exist." That gave me an idea. A desperate one, but it was all we had. "The cellar," I said. "We need to get back down there." "But they're coming in that way." "Not if we block the tunnel. And the cellar has thick walls. It might be the most soundproof place in the cabin." We ran back to the cellar. The tunnels Jessica had mentioned was at the far end. A rough hole in the stone wall, darkness beyond. I could hear scratching sounds coming from inside, getting closer. We needed to act fast. The cellar was full of old furniture, tools and supplies. I grabbed an old mattress and shoved it against the tunnel entrance. Jessica helped me pile more. Things against it, boxes, shelves, anything we could find. "That won't hold them for long," she said. "It doesn't need to. We just need time." I looked around the cellar wildly, my mind racing. "We need to make this room silent, completely silent." We gathered every blanket, rug and piece of fabric we could find and started lining the walls and ceiling. Old egg cartons, foam padding, anything that might absorb sound. Working frantically, we built a makeshift sound-dampening room as the scratching from behind the barricade grew louder. "It's not enough," Jessica said. "We need more insulation." I spotted my grandfather's old hunting clothes hanging on pegs. Wool coats, heavy pants, hats. We stuffed them into the cracks between the stones in the walls. The barricade at the tunnel entrance suddenly shifted as something pushed against it from the other side. We didn't have much time. "What now?" Jessica asked. "Now we create silence," I said. "Complete silence. If they can't hear us, they can't find us. If they can't find us, they can't copy us. But how do we make perfect silence? We're still breathing. Our hearts are still beating." I pulled a small first aid kit from a shelf and opened it. Inside were cotton balls and medical tape. "Put these in your ears. Block out as much sound as you can." We both stuffed our ears with cotton and taped them securely. The world immediately became muffled, distant. I could still hear the scratching at the barricade, but it was faint now. "What else?" Jessica mouthed, knowing I couldn't hear her, but hoping I could read her lips. I pointed to the far corner of the cellar, where we'd built our soundproof nest. We crawled inside, pulling blankets over us. In the darkness, I could feel Jessica's warmth next to me, her body trembling with fear or cold or both. The barricade finally gave way. I couldn't hear it fall, but I felt the vibration through the floor. They were in the cellar now, searching for us. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing, slowing it down, making it as quiet as possible. I tried to slow my heartbeat too, through sheer force of will. Jessica did the same beside me. Time lost all meaning in that dark, silent space. Minutes might have been hours. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. All I could do was wait and hope our plan worked. Eventually, I felt Jessica tap my arm. I opened my eyes. She pointed to her watch. We'd been hiding for over 3 hours. Slowly, carefully, she peeled back one edge of our nest of blankets. The cellar was empty. No copies, no creatures, just stillness. We removed the cotton from our ears, listening. The cabin above was quiet too. No footsteps, no voices. "Did it work?" Jessica whispered. "I think they couldn't find us," I said. Without sound to follow, they had nothing to copy, nothing to feed on. We crawled out of our hiding place and cautiously made our way up the cellar stairs. The cabin was in ruins, walls warped, floorboards pulled up, furniture scattered. But it was empty. Through the broken windows I could see the clearing outside. Also empty. "We should go now," Jessica said, "before they come back." I nodded, but something still bothered me. They said they killed Sarah, caused her accident to lure me here. They lie, Frank, or they trick. That's what these creatures do, in all the stories. But they said they can't create, only copy. So if they can't lie... I didn't finish the thought. It was too painful to consider. Instead, I gathered what supplies I could find. My shotgun, some water, a flashlight. "We need to warn people," I said. "Tell them about this place." Jessica nodded. "We will, but first we need to get off this mountain alive." As we stepped outside, the forest seemed different. The trees stood at strange angles. The shadows fell. Wrong. It was as if the mimics had permanently warped the reality around the cabin. "Which way?" Jessica asked. I pointed east, toward where I'd parked my truck a lifetime ago. "That way, about 4 miles. We began walking, staying close, watching the trees for any sign of movement. The forest remained eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, as if all living things had fled this corrupted place. After about a mile, Jessica suddenly stopped. "Frank," she whispered, "do you hear that?" I listened. At first, nothing. Then I heard it, a faint echo of my own voice, coming from the trees ahead. "Need to warn people. Tell them about this place." My blood ran cold. The exact words I'd said in the cabin just minutes ago. "They're still here," I said, "still hunting us." We changed direction, heading south now, hoping to circle around the mimics. But soon we heard more voices, fragments of our earlier conversations, played back perfectly. "They're herding us," Jessica realized, "using our voices to drive us where they want us to go." The echoes were coming from all directions now, growing louder. Our own voices, our own words, used as weapons against us. And somewhere beneath those familiar sounds, I could hear something else, a hungry, ancient voice, speaking words no human throat could form. "Run," I said, grabbing Jessica's hand. And we did, sprinting through the woods, no longer caring about direction, just trying to escape the closing net of sound. We ran until our lungs burned. The forest blurred around us as we dodged trees and jumped over fallen logs. But no matter how fast we moved, the voices stayed with us, always just behind, always getting closer. "We can't outrun them," Jessica gasped, her breath coming in short bursts. She was right. I slowed to a stop, my mind racing for a new plan. Ahead of us, the ground sloped upward sharply. We were near the edge of the valley, approaching the mountain's steeper face. "Up there," I said, pointing. "Maybe if we get high enough, get out of the valley." Jessica nodded, and we started climbing. The slope was rough, all loose rock and exposed roots that tried to trip us with every step. About halfway up, I spotted something. A narrow ledge with what looked like a dark opening behind it. "A cave," I said. "No way." Jessica shook her head. Firmly. "Last time you went into a cave here, you nearly didn't come back out." "Not to hide in," I explained. "I think I know what these things are now, where they come from. I need to see if I'm right." Reluctantly, Jessica followed me to the ledge. The opening was barely big enough for a person to squeeze through, but it widened once we were inside. I turned on my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the cave walls. What I saw stole the breath from my lungs. The entire cave was covered in markings, the same strange symbols I'd found under the wallpaper in my cabin, but thousands of them spiraling across every surface, and mixed among them were handprints. Human handprints pressed into the stone as if the rock had once been soft clay. Some of these look ancient, Jessica whispered, running her fingers over the markings. Hundreds, maybe thousands of years old. They've been here all along, I said, hunting in this valley, taking people. As we moved deeper into the cave, the floor began to slope downward. The air grew colder, damper, and there was a smell like wet earth and rot. I don't like this, Jessica said. We should turn back. But something pulled me forward, a need to understand what we were fighting. The tunnel narrowed, then opened into a larger chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far wall or ceiling. The space was so vast. That's when I saw them, dozens of half-formed shapes hanging from the ceiling like cocoons. Some looked almost human. Others were twisted, partial things, a leg here, an arm there, a face frozen in a silent scream. All of them were coated in the same black, oil-like substance that had seeped through my cabin walls. Oh God, Jessica breathed. Are those people? Parts of them, I said, my voice hollow. I think this is how they learn. They take pieces, physical pieces, memory pieces, and store them here. We moved further into the chamber, careful not to step beneath the hanging forms. In the center of the room was a raised stone platform. On it lay a human figure. I approached, slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure was old, withered but still breathing. Barely. Tubes of the black substance connected to his body in dozens of places, pulsing slightly as if feeding. Grandfather, I whispered. The old man's eyes flickered open. They were cloudy, unfocused, but they found me in the darkness. Frank! His voice was a dry rasp. Is that really you? I knelt beside him, taking his frail hand in mine. It's me, Grandpa. I'm here. You shouldn't have come, he wheezed. Run, while you still can. What are they doing to you? Using me, my memories, my voice. Been doing it for so long. Each word seemed to cost him terrible effort. They need a source, something living to draw from. I felt sick. My grandfather had been here for decades, kept alive by these creatures, used as a living library of sounds and memories. I'm getting you out of here, I said, though I had no idea how I'd move him. He shook his head weakly. Too late for me. Been part of them too long. His eyes suddenly focused, becoming clearer. But you can stop them, Frank. End this. How? The cave is their heart, their nest. Destroy it. Destroy them. Jessica had been examining the chamber while we talked. Now she called out, Frank, look at this. On the far side of the chamber was what looked like a crack in the wall, a long, jagged line from floor to ceiling. But it wasn't a crack. It was a mouth. A massive, ancient mouth in the living rock itself. They're not just in the mountain, Jessica said. They are the mountain, or part of it. Some kind of symbiote. As if responding to her words, the crack widened slightly. A low, rumbling sound filled the chamber. Not quite a growl. Not quite a word, but something in between. We need to get out of here, I said, turning back to my grandfather. Come with us, please. But his eyes had closed again. His breathing was even shallower now. Too late for me, he repeated, but you can end it. The mountain is unstable, eastern slope ready to fall. I suddenly understood what he was suggesting. A landslide. He nodded slightly. Bury them. All of them. But you'd be buried too. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Already dead, Frank. Been dead. For years. Just end it. The crack in the wall widened further. The black substance began to pool on the floor, flowing toward us like a slow tide. "Frank, we need to go," Jessica urged. "Now!" I squeezed my grandfather's hand one last time. "I'll end it, I promise." We ran, back through the tunnel, through the smaller cave, out onto the mountain slope. The voices were waiting for us, a chorus of stolen sounds growing louder. "If my grandfather is right, we can cause a landslide to bury the cave system," I said, as we scrambled down the slope. "But we'd need something to trigger it." Jessica pointed to my cabin in the distance. "Didn't you say you were a logger? Any explosives in that cellar of yours?" I stared at her. "How did you know I kept blasting caps in the cellar?" Her face went blank for a moment. Then she smiled, that terrible too-wide smile. "Oh, Frank, did you really think you could tell which one of us was real?" I stumbled backward as Jessica's form began to shift, stretching taller, thinner. Her skin rippled. "Like water, you've been leading me in circles," I realized, "keeping me in the valley. You were never Jessica." "The thing that wasn't," Jessica laughed with her voice. "The real one never made it out of the forest, but she was very informative. So many interesting folklore stories in her head." I turned to run, but the fake Jessica moved with blinding speed, cutting me off. "We don't want to hurt you, Frank," it said, its voice shifting between Jessica's and something older, raspier. "We want to join with you, make you immortal, like your grandfather. You've been torturing him for decades. We've been preserving him. He would have died long ago without us, and now he'll live forever, part of something greater." The creature extended a hand toward me. "You can join us willingly. It's less painful that way." For a moment I was tempted, not by the creature's offer, but by exhaustion. I was tired of running, tired of fighting. Maybe giving in would be easier. Then I thought of my grandfather, trapped in that cave for decades, of Riley and Dawson and the hikers who'd come before, of Sarah, whose death these things had caused. "No," I said. "I'm ending this. Today." The creature's face hardened. "Then we take you unwillingly." It lunged at me, but I was ready this time. I sidestepped and shoved it hard, sending it tumbling down the slope. It recovered quickly, but I was already running, not away from the valley, but toward my cabin. I had a plan now, a desperate, probably suicidal plan, but it was all I had. The voices followed me, growing more numerous, more frantic. They weren't just echoing my words anymore. They were screaming, howling, a cacophony of rage and hunger that made my ears hurt. I reached the cabin and burst through the door, heading straight for the cellar. From a locked box in the far corner, I grabbed what I needed: blasting caps, fuses, and a small amount of dynamite left over from when I'd helped clear land for a neighbor years ago. Back outside, I ran toward the eastern slope my grandfather had mentioned. The chorus of voices was closing in from all sides now. Through the trees, I could see them, dozens of copies, some human-looking, others half-formed monstrosities of mixed parts. The eastern slope was steep and barren of trees, mostly loose rock and shale, perfect for a landslide if I could just trigger one big enough. I worked quickly, setting the charges in a line along a natural fault in the slope, right above where I estimated the main cave chamber to be. My hands shook as I connected the fuses. The first of the copies reached me just as I finished. It looked like Riley, but its movements were all wrong, jerky, and too fluid at the same time. "You can't stop us, Frank," it said. "We are ancient. We are Legion." "We are?" A gunshot cut it off mid-sentence. The copy jerked backward, black liquid spraying from its chest. It collapsed, melting into a puddle. I looked up in shock. There, on a ridge above me, stood a woman with a rifle. Jessica, the real Jessica. "Run!" she shouted, firing again as more copies emerged from the trees. I didn't need to be told twice. I lit the fuse and sprinted toward Jessica's position. The copies surged after me, faster than any human could move. But Jessica was a good shot. Each time one got too close, she dropped it with a clean hit. I reached the ridge, gasping for breath. "You're alive?" I panted. "Barely," she said, not taking her eyes off the approaching horde. "I've been hiding in the trees, watching them hunt." "You've been figured out they don't like bullets much." A deep rumble cut through the air, followed by a sound like thunder. The ground beneath our feet began to shake. "It's starting," I said. "The landslide." We watched as half the mountainside began to collapse, tons of rock and earth sliding toward the valley below. The kopjes screamed, a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before, high and piercing and ancient. The ground split open in dozens of places, black liquid gushing out like blood from a wound. The kopjes began to melt, their borrowed forms dissolving, as their connection to the nest was severed. "Will it be enough?" Jessica asked. "I don't know." The landslide continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When it finally stopped, a massive scar ran down the eastern face of the mountain, and the entrance to the cave system was completely buried. In the sudden silence, I could hear birds again. The natural sounds of the forest were returning, filling the void left by the mimics. "Is it over?" Jessica asked. "I think so," I said, but I wasn't entirely convinced. These things had survived for centuries, maybe millennia. Could they really be destroyed so easily? As if in answer, a single echo floated through the air. My own voice, distant and distorted. "I think so." Jessica and I looked at each other. Without a word, we started walking, away from the mountain, away from the valley, away from Echo Mountain. Behind us, very faintly, our footsteps echoed back to us. But the echoes came before our steps, not after. The hike down from Echo Mountain was the longest journey of my life. Every shadow in the trees looked like a kopje waiting to pounce. Every bird call made us jump. By the time we reached my truck, still parked where I'd left it all those weeks ago, night was falling. "Where will you go?" Jessica asked as I turned. The engine came to life with a comforting rumble. "Anywhere but here," I said. "You?" "Back to Portland. I need to tell someone about Mark and Dave." We drove in silence for a while, both lost in our own thoughts. The highway stretched before us, taking us away from the mountain. But the farther we got, the more a knot formed in my stomach. "They said my wife was going to leave me," I finally said. "That they caused her accident to bring me to the cabin. Do you think that was true?" Jessica looked at me with tired eyes. "Those things feed on pain, Frank. They twist the truth to hurt you. Even if Sarah was planning to leave, that doesn't mean they didn't lie about causing her death." I nodded, wanting to believe her, but doubt had already taken root. How much of what I knew was true? How much was the mimic's manipulation? "What if we didn't get all of them?" I asked. "What if some escaped the landslide?" Jessica didn't answer. Right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. "Then they're still out there, learning, copying, waiting. Should we tell someone? The police? The Forest Service? And tell them what? That shape-shifting monsters are living in the mountains? That they can copy people perfectly?" She shook her head. "They'd lock us up." She was right. Without proof. Our story sounded like the ramblings of madmen, and the only proof we had was buried under tons of rock and dirt. I dropped Jessica off at a bus station in the next town. We exchanged phone numbers, promising to call if anything strange happened, if the echoes returned. "Be careful," she said as she got out. "They know you now, better than anyone." "You too." I watched her walk away, wondering if I'd ever see her again, wondering if she was really Jessica, or if I'd been tricked one last time. The drive back to Portland was long and lonely. My apartment felt small and empty after the vastness of the mountains. I tried to return to normal life, looking for a new job, talking to old friends, pretending I was still the same Frank Kowalski who'd left weeks ago. But I wasn't. I jumped at every echo, flinched at every reflection, woke up sweating from dreams. where I peeled back my own skin to find black oil underneath. 3 months after Echo Mountain, I got a call. The Forest Service had found my grandfather's cabin, what was left of it after the landslide. They wanted to know if I'd like to claim any recovered items. I said no. Let it all stay buried. 6 months after that, I saw my first copy in the city. A man on the bus who moved a little too smoothly, who smiled a little too widely when he caught me looking, who whispered my name in my grandfather's voice as I hurried off at the next stop. I left Portland that night, changed my name, moved across the country, started over. But sometimes late at night I hear my own voice coming from empty rooms. Sometimes I find footprints in my apartment that match mine exactly. Sometimes my radio picks up fragments of conversations I haven't had yet. And sometimes, when I dream, I see the mountain, the cave, the black mouth in the stone, waiting patiently for my return. Because the thing about echoes is, they never really die. They just get quieter, traveling farther and farther away until you think they're gone. But they're not gone. They're just waiting for the right moment to come back. Waiting to be heard again. 1 week ago, I received a postcard. No return address. Just a picture of the Cascade Mountains and 4 words in handwriting identical to mine. We miss you, Frank. I burned the card, packed a bag, and moved again. But I know it doesn't matter how far I go or how many times I change my name. They found me once. They'll find me again because they're not just copying me anymore. They are me. And the only way to truly escape Echo Mountain is to become so silent, so absent, that there's nothing left to echo. So if you're ever hiking in the Cascades and you hear a voice calling your name from between the trees, do not answer, do not follow. And if you find an old cabin in a hidden valley, do not enter. Do not listen to the voices that say they need your help. Just run. Run as fast and as far as you can, because once the mountain has heard you, the echoes never stop. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm a wildlife biologist, and I came to the White Mountains of northern Maine to study wolves. The university gave me funding to set up a small cabin here in 1967, far away from everyone and everything. I wanted to watch how wolves move around during winter when food gets scarce. I didn't know I'd picked one of the strangest places in America. The locals call it Frost Hollow because winter here lasts longer than anywhere else in Maine. Once October hits, no cars can get through until May. The snow piles higher than a house, and the cold. Well, the cold isn't normal. You sure about staying up there alone, miss? Harold Peterson asked me while helping carry my boxes into the cabin. Harold was my guide, a local man with a grey beard and eyes that had seen too much. These mountains got stories. I'll be fine, I told him with a smile. I have my radio to call for help, plenty of food, and all my research equipment. Harold looked at the setting sun and started packing up his things faster. You're not staying the night? I asked. No one stays in Frost Hollow after dark, he said, not looking at me. Not if they know better. Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, his truck fighting through the early October snow. That first night I found an old wooden box under some floorboards. Inside were yellowed papers, records from the 1880s. My little cabin sat right on top of what used to be a logging camp. 20 men disappeared here during one terrible blizzard. The report said they just vanished, with their belongings still in their bunks. No bodies were ever found. I told myself it was just an old story. I had wolves to study. The next day, while setting up my equipment, I spotted something strange hanging from the trees around a clearing about half a mile from my cabin. They looked like wind chimes, but made from bones. Some were small, like bird bones, but others looked human. I took one down and brought it back to study. My scientific mind tried to explain it. Maybe it was from the old logging days. Maybe natives had made them years ago. But why did the wolves never go near that clearing? My temperature gauges started showing weird readings. Small pockets of air around the forest would suddenly drop to -60 degrees for just a minute, then return to normal. That's not possible according to any weather pattern I'd studied. The wolves were acting strange too. I'd been tracking a pack of 7, watching their hunting and migration. But they avoided certain areas completely, even when those areas had plenty of deer or rabbits. The alpha male would stop at invisible lines in the snow, sniff the air, then lead the pack miles around instead of going through. One morning after a light snow, I found something that made my skin crawl. Near a small pond not far from my cabin were perfect ice sculptures, little pillars of ice rising about 2 feet high. They couldn't have formed naturally. Each one twisted in impossible ways, catching the sunlight like diamonds. The university. Radio was my only connection to the outside world, and it was getting worse every day. Sometimes when my supervisor, Dr. Mills, called, his voice would come through backwards. Other times I'd hear whispers behind his words, voices I didn't recognize saying things I couldn't quite make out. Then came the day I found the faces. I was gathering water samples from a pond when I noticed something in the ice. Staring up at me from beneath the frozen surface were human faces, dozens of them, perfectly preserved in the ice like photographs. Men with beards, women, even children. Their eyes seemed to follow me as I moved around the pond. I dropped my sample jar and ran back to my cabin. I told myself I was just tired, that the isolation was making me imagine things. I was a scientist after all. There had to be a rational explanation. But deep down, I knew Frost Hollow was waking up, and I was about to discover why no one stays after dark. The first real snowstorm hit in early November. I'd seen snow before, but nothing like this. It came. Down in sheets so thick I couldn't see the trees just 20 feet from my window. The wind howled like a living thing, throwing itself against my cabin walls over and over. My radio went completely dead. No static, no signal, nothing, just silence. That's when the tapping started. Tap, 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 slow and steady, like fingernails on my roof. I told myself it was just branches in the wind, but there weren't any trees that close to the cabin. Tap, tap. Tap. I pulled my blanket tighter and stared at the ceiling. The temperature inside the cabin was dropping fast, even though I had the wood stove burning hot. My breath came out in white clouds. Tap, tap, tap. When morning finally came, I checked the roof. No footprints in the fresh snow, no broken branches. Nothing that could have made that sound. I went to get breakfast and found all my food frozen solid. Canned beans, soup, even my coffee, all turned to ice, even though they were inside the heated cabin. That wasn't possible. The stove had been going all night. While checking my supplies, I found something wedged behind a shelf, an old leather journal. The cover was stiff and cracked, dated 1887. Inside, a man named Thomas Blackwood had written about his time at the logging camp. "The cold here isn't natural," he wrote. "It follows us, watches us. The men talk of ice walkers, creatures that don't want our flesh but our heat, our life. Richards disappeared yesterday. We found only his clothes, frozen stiff in the shape of a man, like he'd been hollowed out." I closed the journal, my hands shaking. The temperature reader on my wall showed 15 degrees inside the cabin, even though the fire was roaring. 3 days later, I heard voices outside. Real human voices. I grabbed my flashlight and ran out into the snow. A man and woman, both in their 30s, stumbled through the drifts toward my cabin. The woman's lips were blue, her eyes unfocused. The man was half carrying her. "Thank God," he gasped when he saw me. "We got lost. Our car broke down on the forestry road. We've been walking for hours." I helped them inside. Their names were Trevor and Lynn Reed. They'd been driving to visit family up north when their car slid off. The road. The strange thing was, there wasn't any road within 10 miles of my cabin. "We heard our daughter's voice," Lynn said, her eyes clearer now as she warmed by the fire, "calling to us through the trees. We followed it. Your daughter? I asked. Is she out there? Trevor and Lynn looked at each other. Our daughter died 3 years ago, Trevor said quietly. That night, ice started forming on the inside of my cabin walls. Crystal patterns spread across the wood, even though the stove was hot enough to make the air shimmer. Trevor couldn't sleep. He kept going to the window, staring out at the darkness. Something's out there, he whispered. I can hear it calling my name. In the morning, I found Trevor in the bathroom, staring at his arm. Strange ice-like patterns had formed under his skin, spreading from his wrist up to his elbow. They looked like delicate frost on a window, but they were inside him. What's happening to me? He asked. His breath no longer made clouds in the air, even though Lynn's and mine did. That night, I checked the memory cards from the cameras I'd set up around the clearing. What I saw made me drop the cards on the floor. Tall, thin shapes moved through. The snow. They looked almost human, but stretched too long, too thin. And they weren't walking on the snow. They were moving through it, like the snow was water, and they were swimming. But the worst part was when one turned toward the camera. It had no face, just a smooth surface that reflected the moonlight like glass. It reached toward the lens, and the screen went white with frost. Trevor heard noises outside again that night. Something that sounded like his daughter laughing. I need to see, he said, pulling on his coat. Lynn grabbed his arm. Don't go out there. But he went anyway. I watched from the window as Trevor waded into the snow. He stopped about 50 feet from the cabin and looked up at the sky. The moonlight shone off the strange patterns on his skin, making them glow blue. Something moved in the trees. Something tall and thin and glistening. Trevor didn't scream. He didn't run. He just stood there as the thing reached out and touched his face. By morning, Trevor was gone. In his place was a perfect ice sculpture, right down to the wrinkles in his clothes and the watch on his wrist. His face was frozen in an expression of wonder, not fear, and it felt cold in a way that went beyond temperature. Standing near it made my soul feel frozen. Lynn touched the ice statue's face and whispered, "He's still in there. I can feel him watching me." That night, I learned what true cold really was. The thing that took Trevor came back, bringing friends. They moved through the walls like they were made of fog, tall shapes that seemed to be made of ice so clear you could almost see through them. When they entered the cabin, the temperature dropped so fast that the glass in the windows cracked. "Wendigo," Lynn whispered, her eyes wide. "My grandmother used to tell stories, creatures of ice and hunger." The tallest one moved toward us. It didn't walk. It glided, leaving a trail of frost on the floor. Up close, I could see it better. Its body looked like a human made of crystal, stretched too tall and too thin. Where a face should be, there was just a smooth surface that reflected our own terrified faces back at us. It reached out one long, thin hand and touched the wall. Instantly, a perfect copy of my hand formed in the ice there, like it had frozen. My handprint through the wall. "They don't want our bodies," Lynn said, backing away. "They want our heat, our life force." I noticed something wrong with Lynn's breathing. Each time she exhaled, tiny ice crystals floated from her mouth. When she coughed, I saw something sparkle inside, ice forming in her lungs. "How do you know all this?" I asked her. She didn't answer, but I saw the same ice patterns that had been on Trevor's skin, now creeping up her neck. The Wendigo made a sound then, like icicles breaking in winter. It was talking, and somehow I understood it. "We have always been here," it seemed to say, "long before your kind. We sleep for many winters. Now we wake, now we feed." A bright light swept across the windows. Headlights. The Wendigo disappeared, melting into the walls like they were never there. A man in a forest ranger uniform burst through the door, shotgun in hand. "Maine Forest Service," he shouted. "Is everyone okay? We got reports of missing hikers." His name was Cooper. He'd been searching for Trevor and Lynn after their car was found abandoned. "Where's the man you were traveling with, ma'am?" Cooper asked Lynn. Lynn just pointed to the ice sculpture outside. Cooper laughed nervously. "That's just ice, ma'am." I tried to explain what we'd seen, but Cooper clearly thought we were suffering from hypothermia or cabin fever, until he saw Lynn cough up ice crystals. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping back. That's when I noticed something outside the window. More ice sculptures had appeared around the cabin, perfect frozen copies of people, men, women, children. Some looked old-fashioned, wearing clothes from another century. "The logging camp," I whispered. "The men who disappeared." Cooper went to the window to look. "Holy—" He never finished. One of the Wendigos appeared behind him, reaching through the glass like it wasn't there. It touched the back of Cooper's neck, and I watched in horror as his skin turned blue, then white. Ice spread through the veins in his neck, moving down into his chest. He tried to scream, but his throat froze solid. In seconds, Cooper was frozen in place, alive but unable to move, his eyes darting back and forth in terror. Lynn grabbed my arm. "They're getting stronger. It happens every 80 years. They wake up, they feed, they go back to sleep." "How do you know that?" I demanded. She looked at me with eyes that were turning cloudy, like frozen pools. "Because I grew up near here. My grandmother was the only survivor the last time they woke. She told me the stories. I didn't believe her. Lynn's skin was turning translucent. I could see the blue of her veins, filled with ice instead of blood. "This cabin," Lynn whispered. "It's not a coincidence you built it here. They called you, just like they called us. They've been in your head for months, making you see what they wanted you to see." I thought about my research, how I'd chosen this exact spot to build my cabin. Had I really made that choice? Or had something else guided me here? The temperature was dropping so fast that the air itself seemed to be slowing down. Water spilled. From a cup moved like syrup. Sound echoed strangely. Time itself felt frozen. Cooper's frozen body tipped over, hitting the floor with a sound like breaking glass. But he didn't shatter. His eyes still moved, watching us. Still alive somehow. Looking. Out the window, I saw lights in the distance. A search and rescue team. "No," I whispered. "They can't come here." Lynn was crying, tears freezing on her cheeks. "It's too late. Trevor isn't gone. None of them are gone. The Wendigos don't kill. They preserve. They keep us conscious inside the ice while they slowly feed on our warmth for years." I backed away from her, bumping into my research equipment. My thermal imaging camera fell to the floor, turning on as it landed. Through its screen, I could see the Wendigos clearly. Dozens of them, moving through the walls, the floor, the furniture. In thermal imaging, they showed up as deep blue holes in the world, colder than anything should be able to exist. But they each had a small, bright spot at their center, a core that glowed with stolen heat. Lynn was changing faster now, her skin hardening to ice, her movements slowing. "You need to destroy them when they're feeding," she said, her voice crackling like breaking ice. "It's the only time they're vulnerable." Outside, the search and rescue team had arrived. 5 people, moving through the snow toward my cabin. They had no idea what was waiting. I grabbed my kerosene heater and ran out the door. "Go back!" I shouted at them. "You can't come here." But it was too late. The Wendigos rose from the snow around them, tall crystal figures reaching for the newcomers. One by one, the rescue team froze in place, perfect ice statues in the snow. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. "Harold, my guide from months ago. You shouldn't have stayed," he said sadly. "Some places ain't meant for the living." "You knew," I said. "You knew about them." He nodded. "My family's been watching over this place for generations, keeping people away when the feeding time comes." "Why didn't you warn me? Would you have believed me?" he asked. "Besides, they wanted you here. When they want something, ain't no stopping it." I looked down at my thermal camera. The Wendigos were feeding on the rescue team, drawing bright streams of heat from the frozen bodies. Their central cores glowed brighter. I knew what I had to do. I turned up my kerosene heater to the highest setting and ran toward the nearest Wendigo. It turned to me, drawn by my heat. "Want some warmth?" I shouted. "Come and get it!" The creature reached for me with icy hands. I dodged, watching through the camera as its core glowed brighter in anticipation of feeding. I threw the heater straight at that glowing core. The Wendigo shattered with a sound like 1,000 windows breaking at once. Shards of ice flew everywhere, melting almost instantly, but there were too many of them, and only one of me. They surrounded me, reaching out with frozen hands. I felt their cold touch on my skin. Ice began to form inside me. I could feel it spreading, through my veins, creeping toward my heart. My movements slowed as my joints began to freeze. In my last moments of freedom, I aimed my camera at the largest Wendigo, the first one we had seen, the one that had taken Trevor. Its core was enormous, pulsing with the heat of dozens of victims. With my remaining strength, I lunged forward and pressed my thermal imaging lens directly against its core. The electronics overheated, sparking and burning. The creature screamed, a sound like an entire glacier cracking apart. Light exploded around me. Heat and cold battled inside my body. Then, darkness. Hikers found my research cabin years later. They reported finding a collection of strange ice sculptures in a clearing. People, frozen in various poses, perfectly preserved. Among them was a woman in a research jacket, thermal camera still clutched in her frozen hands. The Park Service roped off the area. They say it's for visitor safety. But I know the truth. I'm still here, still watching through eyes of ice, still conscious as the cold slowly feeds on what remains of my warmth. Sometimes people wander too close. They say one of the sculptures moved, just a little, when no one was looking. They're right. I'm trying to warn them about what sleeps beneath. Frost Hollow, about what wakes every 80 years, about what waits for them in the cold.